That was loud. I will call this Tigard City Council meeting to order. Deputy City Recorder Raymundo, please call roll.
Mayor Lube,
Here.
Youth Councilor Vogel,
Here.
Councilor Shaw, Councilor Singh,
Here.
Councilor Wolf,
Here.
Council President Hu.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. If everyone will join me and stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you, everyone. It's nice to be back here and nice to see everyone. I wanted to start off by thanking and acknowledging all of our workers. You know, everybody from our police department to our public works department, and even TVF&R and the PGE crews that were out there the last couple of weeks have been really challenging for our community. And I want to thank wholeheartedly our Tigard teammates for stepping up and working around the clock so our city could be safe. You know, we have many reports of city teammates responding to trees going down or burst pipes, and even seeing, you know, oh, I called and they answered and they were out quickly and they really helped us. You know, that it just makes such a difference to our community to be able to count on us in those really challenging times. So from myself and I believe from the council, just thank you so much for everything that you've done to our Tigard teammates to really keep our city strong through a really challenging and cold time. So does anybody want to add anything else to that? Someone up? Okay. Thank you. Are there any non-agenda items for city teammates or councilors?
None from us, Mayor.
All right. Thank you so much. We will move on to public comment. If you want to call in now to get in the queue, please do so. The phone number is 503-966-4101. And anyone in person wishing to comment, you can sign up at the front of the room. We did not have public comment from the previous meeting, so there's no follow-up. We did receive 2 public comments by noon yesterday. And the first is from Ethan Erickson requesting that Steve Street Park develop and become a park in 2024. And the second one is from Colin Cortez regarding some charter language suggestions around eligibility rules, and just, I think, a specific one that the City of Tigard Charter 2024 be on the draft. So those are the written comments. Is there anyone signed up to comment in person this evening?
Not at this time, Mayor.
Thank you. Interim Senior Network Administrator Thornburg, are there any phone callers in the queue or video callers this evening?
Not at this time.
Thank you so much. We will go to City Manager Reimer for the City Manager report.
Well, thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor, members of the council, community members, our budget committee, and our teammates that are here. Thanks for starting off saying a word of thanks to all of our teammates. I want to reiterate what you just said as well. I think from our public works, as you said, police department, our facilities team, our communications team, to make sure that both teammates as well as the community was informed. I did an exemplary job, as well as many others. I also want to say thanks to our CERT team, our community emergency response team. They also invested time throughout that, making sure that our community was safe and providing space for our community members. And then our community in general, and talking to Chief McDonald, our police department, we're very appreciative that people took note of the weather and decided to stay home and not be on the roads, and that really does have a very much a positive impact, obviously, on them as drivers, but on our emergency responders, our police department, TVF&R, our ambulance services, and others. So thank you to the community for just staying home when the road conditions weren't that great. We had our series of accidents here and there, but nothing that not to the level that we could have had. So kudos to the community for that. Just a few other things following up on the weather as well. Our library is working hard to process over 2,000 hold requests that we received last week during the storm. Just to give you an example, typically we have about 300 requests. So our community members couldn't get to the library. Obviously, we didn't have the library open. but people still were wanting materials to come up. Just a couple events this week for yourselves in the community. First is Wednesday the 24th at 8:30. We have our monthly economic development team of Tina and Lloyd meet with our new businesses, and so we'll be at Primo Espresso this week. It's always a chance for sometimes one business, sometimes three businesses, sometimes five new businesses to come and just understand the role that we can play, resources the city can provide to them, a chance for new businesses to start networking amongst themselves. So thanks to Tina and Lloyd for those. And then the last one this week is our coffee and conversation at the library. We hold those monthly. So that's this Thursday at 9 a.m. So it gets a chance to get to know our library and our library team, and just to humanize the services that we provide. So that concludes my remarks this evening. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Okay. Seeing none, we will move on to the renewal levy and smarter charter polling results and ballot themes with Assistant City Manager Nyland. Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So, IT, can you put up the PowerPoint? So thankfully, IT will be driving the PowerPoint this evening, so I can concentrate on inundating you with a bunch of numbers. So good evening, Mayor and Council, and Budget Committee and community members. My name is Kathy Nyland, Assistant City Manager of Engagement and Innovation. I'm here tonight to provide an update on two measures you are considering placing on the May 2024 ballot. Those are the Public Safety Renewal Levy and a charter amendment, also known as the Smarter Charter. I'm going to provide some history, how we got to this point, some background about previous activities, and some findings through our recent opinion research. While this is an informational briefing, we are looking for your thoughts and guidance as far as language that resonates, what you'd like to see on the ballot title, and in the summary, if you decide to refer these measures. Next slide, please. So before I jump into numbers and stats, and again, a lot of information that I hope doesn't bore you, I want to provide a little bit of background. As you may recall, Tigard approved a local option levy for police services in 2020. That is set to expire in 2025. We provided several briefings to council in 2023, background about that levy, the reasons why we went to the community, and the continuing need for service and that investment. You gave us direction to continue working towards a May 2024 election, which we have done. In September, we fielded a poll which showed us the level of support for a possible renewal, as well as the work that was needed to increase awareness and ideally support. Next slide, please. So a little bit about the charter amendments. In 2023, the city convened a community-led process to review the charter. A 14-person charter review committee met 15 times over the course of 8 months. They studied city charters from around the state, reviewed state and local laws, and examined other resources to propose changes to Tigard's city charter. The committee recommendations were made by consensus, which required 75% of the membership to agree on any changes. The proposed updates were to make the charter more accessible to the public and easier to interpret. The core tenets of the charter remain the same, including Tigard's form of government, how officials are elected, and how laws are proposed. A briefing of those recommendations was presented to City Council on September 19th, 2023, and Council's direction was to proceed for possible consideration on a May 2024 ballot measure. Next slide, please. So in September, we did field a community attribute survey in early September 2023. The purpose, again, was to gauge support of a renewal levy and to affirm some key messages. We saw initial support was 57%, and after providing more information, that support grew to 62%. That poll provided us very useful information and also reminded us that there was still work to be done, and we have been busy doing just that. Next slide, please. So this just captures some of the outreach we've done to date. In September, the police department held their open house, the first time in a few years, and over 800 people attended that event. In October, November, and December, we utilized our city newsletters, including Talking Tigard, which is internal, and Cityscape, which is external, and we will continue to do so. Over the last few months, we've created a series of videos featuring the mayor, faith-based leaders, school resource officers, and we had a charter community Q&A. We had a presence at events, including Chat with the Chief, Drug Take Back, Leaf Disposal, and more. In December and January, we created utility billing stuffers. The Mayor's Corner mentioned both of these measures in previous columns. January's Tigard Life issue featured a full-page color ad about both measures. And we fielded another poll earlier this month, last week actually, and that is what I'm going to focus on tonight. Next slide, please. So a little bit about the methodology. A survey of 400 likely voters in the city of Tigard was conducted by telephone using professional interviewers. We made sure the callers said Tigard and not Tigard. We hear that a lot. A voter sample was used and quotas and weights were set to reflect a May 2024 likely electorate. Interviews were conducted January 14th through the 17th. The margin of error for the sample as a whole is plus or minus 4.9% and 95% level of confidence. So I included a data point at the bottom of the slide because I thought it was important. In the September poll, we saw that almost certain and probably will vote was a 50-50 split. During that presentation back in September, I mentioned that 50% felt particularly high, perhaps overly optimistic. There was a concern about apathy. So seeing this drop may indicate that apathy could be a factor. People not feeling the need to vote, not a compelling reason to vote, or not seeing a purpose to vote. So it's just something for us to be aware of. Next slide, please. So this is just really a high-level summary in the simplest of terms. Both measures show a majority of support. There are still people who don't know how they may vote, and a large number who are unaware of these measures. As far as communication, there is a path that will likely increase support. For the renewal levy, mention this is not an increase to your tax rate. For the charter amendment, provide details and mention this is not an increase to your tax rate. By doing these two things, we see support increase in double digits. As far as some of the ways that people receive information, traditional news outlets and friends and family are the best ways to reach our community. Next slide, please. Now on to the details. So let's start with some good news. With intentional messaging, we see support for the renewal levy at 68%. Woo woo. Just had to do a woo-woo there. In the September survey, we saw that by providing additional information, support of the renewal levy grew to 62%. In this recent survey, we saw that by reminding participants that a renewal would not increase taxes, support increased from 52% to 68%. Next slide, please. So the survey asked about the renewal levy 3 times. The first ask was a basic initial ask. If the election were held today, would you vote yes or no on the public safety renewal? The second ask was a reminder that this was a renewal. We said, to be clear, this is a levy renewal, meaning property taxes will not increase if the measure passes. And our third ask was made after providing additional information, including what the renewal funds. Next slide, please. So these are the results after the first ask. There's a comparison, what we heard January 2024 compared to what we heard in September 23. You'll see strong support has waned, going from 24% in September to 18% in January. Soft support increased slightly from 33% to 34%. Soft opposition increased slightly from 12% to 15%. Strong opposition went from 16% to 9%. and our unknowns went from 16% to 23%. So in September 2023, our yes margin was 29%. In this recent poll, yes margin was 28%. So I'm just going to pause there for a moment because I know I'm giving you a lot of information. I will also say, fret not, because it gets better, and also there is a very clear path going forward. Next slide, please. So again, by reminding participants that this was a renewal and would not be an increase to your taxes, support grows by double digits. Our strong support goes from the initial 18% to 25%, and soft support increases from 34% to 43% for a gain of 16% in net support. Our yes margin went from 28% to 44% by reminding that passage would not increase tax rates. We also see that those who did not know how they might vote went from 23% to 8% once they learned this levy was a renewal, and if it passed, it would not increase your tax rate. We did not see that level of support increase in our September poll. When we asked the question the second time, reminding people that this was a renewal, we saw the slightest bump of support increase by 1%. So seeing a 16% increase is significant and a reminder about the importance of messaging. Next slide, please. So the third ask was when we provided even more information about the renewal levy. We provided information about the funding aspect and inquired about priorities. After that battery of questions, we once again asked how they might vote for the renewal levy. We saw only slight movement, but no change in the net support or net opposition. The yes margin remained at 44%. So the takeaway, simple messaging is important and renewal is key. Next slide, please. So the takeaways that we learned. Between September's poll to present, Democrats and people of color emerge as our strongest proponents. Conversely, we lost ground amongst registered Republicans, and we think it's because we made that switch from police services to public safety. Again, by reiterating that this is a renewal, support grew by a double-digit margin, 16%. Where support increased the most in that second ask, women who did not attend college, older women, and by older women we mean women over 50, and people over 60 years of age. A majority of participants, 51%, report that they have seen, read, or heard something about the public safety renewal levy. 38% say they have not seen, read, or heard anything about the renewal levy. The top funding priorities include maintaining services and funding for crisis intervention training. Those are what stood out to those who participated in this poll. So for definition purposes, targets are defined as voters who started out undecided or soft supporters, and movers are defined as voters who become supporters after the course of the survey. Next slide, please. Now on to the second ballot measure under consideration, the Smarter Charter. So again, let's start with good news. Always nice to see these numbers. We see that a majority support is there for the charter amendment. Through the survey, we learned more about the language that resonates with potential voters. We learned that providing details also builds support. And once again, by reminding participants that the charter amendment would not increase tax rate, more support was gained. Next slide, please. So this is the first time we did a survey around the charter amendment. Our focus was to gauge support and also test language for a potential ballot title if you choose to place it on the May election. We had a split sample question and tested those options. We asked participants about support twice during the survey. The first was just an initial ask, and the second ask was made after additional information was provided. Next slide, please. So this shows the split sample questions. Sample A, again, straightforward. asking participants how they would vote on a new charter. The split sample B provides more information and details about the proposed new charter. Next slide, please. So as this graph shows, providing more details about the changes to Tigard's charter amendment results in substantially more support than simply replacing the current city charter. Split sample A, which was minimal language, showed support at 41%. Split sample B, which provided more specifics, showed support at 53%, another double-digit increase. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the results of our second ask. When we clarified that the charter amendment will not result in a tax increase, we saw support strengthen in both split sample questions. Split sample A went from 41% support to 49% support. Split sample B increased from 43% to 57%. Next slide, please. So some takeaways on the charter amendment. First, having the split sample question was really valuable. When we provided specifics about the proposed changes, retaining current form of government, adding 2 counselors, amending term limits, we saw an increase in support moving from 41% to 53%, a double-digit increase. And providing details, and by mentioning that this would not increase taxes, we saw support increase to 57%. So the more detailed versions perform better across all partisan spectrums. This information can help, we hope, with your deliberations on language for ballot titles and summary. We also see what a path forward looks like building a coalition of support. Next slide, please. So the next 2 slides show us how people stay informed and who they trust. For communications, we ask participants how they stay informed on city happenings or business. It's useful data for us as we continue to develop our strategic communications plan, wanting to reach the widest audience possible and use tools that resonate most with our community. One thing to note, neighbors, friends, and family was at 41% and social media at 13%. I think there's probably more intersection there, as text messaging is a really popular way to share information and provide updates and FYIs. I know I texted a lot last week just telling neighbors like we had heat, garbage pickup wasn't coming, so it was all about text messaging. Anyway, this information shows the importance to build and maintain relationships throughout all forms of media and to be mindful and intentional of which tools to deploy, when, and how. Next slide, please. So our last data point is about trust, wanting to know who our best ambassadors are to deliver information, news, and updates. What is especially interesting about this data point is we see an increase in net trust since our September poll. We see increases ranging from 8% to 20%. Each one of you rank high within Tigard, and that speaks volumes to the work you do for and with community. This also differs greatly from the national narrative, where government trust is quite low. The fact that your trust has increased in, again, double digits over the course of a few months, kudos to you and the work that you do. Next slide, please. So now that I've inundated you with all this information, we can talk next steps. As mentioned, there are 2 measures that you are considering placing on the May 2024 ballot. Tonight's focus was about opinion research results. We saw themes emerge. This information could help in crafting language and developing possible ballot titles and summary. Our city attorney is here, listening and also available for questions. So that said, based on what you've heard tonight, do you have strong feelings or preferences about language? This would be a great time to give us direction so we can start the work and best prepare you for upcoming discussions and deliberations as you consider referring these measures for the May 2024 election. So thank you for your time, and happy to open it up for questions, comments, and your guidance.
Thank you. It's a lot of good information that I think we all absorbed. and really helpful information. So I will start asking the counselors if they have strong positions on, we will start with the police levy renewal, the public safety levy, because I think we should probably try to tackle one thing at a time. I will just say I think themes of renewal, no new taxes is really important, and talking about specifically what it pays for. But I will open it up. I guess we're sharing a mic, so we can both lean in.
Actually, Mayor Lube, I don't have that much to add. So thank you, Kathy, for the presentation and the update, and really all the city's work that's been dedicated to inform our community on what we do and how important this is to deliver it. The price sensitivity was, just really brought home. So I concur with Mayor Lube's comments, and I think keep it simple, keep it focused, and definitely no new taxes. So anyway, thanks.
Council.
Thank you, Mayor Lube. Thank you, Assistant City Manager Nyland, for this excellent presentation. Just a couple of observations. One is when we were at the police open house and when I talked to public members, as soon as I told them there's no increase in tax rate, and everything I heard is no-brainer. Yes, no-brainer. So that is important. The second observation is that the third tier question, when you provide more information, even though it didn't really add overall support, I think you mentioned that overall people were very interested in de-escalation training and school resource officers. So when I look at the 2020 ballot title, the question, which allowed a lot more words in it, it didn't mention the escalation training. So if it's possible, I know that the wording is the number of words limited. So I just don't know if it will be more helpful to increase our chances of passage if we put this the training, mention the training, the question itself. I don't know if that's doable, because they're only like 20-some words limitation, right? So, yeah, but if possible, if we can work it in, I
Okay.
think that might help a little bit. So,
That's the kind of guidance we're looking for. As city attorney and I will be, with pens and paper and chalk and erasing and doing that word salad exercise. But in that poll, we did see that maintaining services
Right.
was the top.
Right.
It was like maintaining and continuing were the two words that seemed to resonate. And then that second tier was about that training. And we saw that in the first poll when we asked people why they opposed. The first one was trust, and the second one was training, and then the third one was misunderstanding. They thought it was an increase. So we are tackling all of those. So the guidance about trying to include some reference to training, we will go back, and I see Shelby has put her camera on and is ready to comment or take notes, and I'm taking notes too, Shelby.
I think I would just add, because we received the email, but I think the broader community doesn't know that there's three parts, the ballot title, which is the caption, question, and summary. So the caption is 10 words, the question is 20, and the summary is 175. So there are very specific restrictions on the amount of words that we can say, and I forget which one of them, but it has to include the rate per 1,000, and so that takes a couple of words. So we're very specifically limited on how many words we can say where, which is why we're having this intense conversation over wordsmithing and word salads.
And I'm just gonna, I'll provide my wonkiness. So I've gone through various pamphlets over the last few years, and I've like cut and paste samples of highlighting, what resonates. So we have samples that we could work off of to present.
Councillor Singh, I wanted to make sure that you had an opportunity to speak if you had anything to add.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks, Kathy. Yeah, I have a recommendation, a comment, and a few questions. So my recommendation is really to be clear that this is about policing and not include the term public safety at all. In the January 2024 police levy survey section, it looks like 8 Black community members were surveyed out of 400. Of those that said they would vote, half and almost majority indicated that they would vote no on the police levy, whereas the majority of those that identified as Asian and Hispanic said they would vote yes. So based on this data, lumping POC together on this issue really distorts the reality and makes one of the first statements in the summary slide, which I think is slide 13, makes it an overgeneralization and really hides the perspective of those that took the survey and identified as Black. So that's my comment. I have a few questions.
Were you looking for a response on your comment, or did you want to move forward with questions, Councillor Singh? So it looks like something happened with your microphone. I saw you mute and unmute, but we unfortunately can't hear you. We'll wait and give him an opportunity to come back. I do also want to add that I think it's incredible for our community to have that level of trust in us. I think as a council, and especially kudos to our police department for working so hard to build that community trust. Again, there is a national narrative, and I don't think there's necessarily inaccuracies in some of the stuff that's going on. But one of the things I always encourage community members when I'm having that conversation is please get to know your police department, understand what we're doing here and how we're serving our community. And I think that helps acknowledge that there are challenges nationally. Not that we don't certainly have our challenges here, but they look different. And, so I was at the U.S. Conference of Mayors this past week, and I went to one of the breakout sessions was updates in policing, and I thought it would be really helpful to go in case there was something new going on. They didn't present anything that I didn't already know or that the Tigard Police Department wasn't already working on, which is, I think, an incredible testament to really our department working on building that community relationship and being at the leading edge. So I wanted to acknowledge that. And also fill the space so it wasn't silent. Councillor Singh, are you back?
Hey.
Oh, we can hear you.
Hear me? Oh, great. Sorry about that. Yeah, so I don't know where I cut off, but I provided a comment about the numbers, and then I had a few questions just about the process. And, to me, it's astounding to see how much city resources have gone into campaigning for a police renewal levy. I've seen stickers on the back of Tigard police vehicles promoting this levy, and it's just made me curious to know if the city is required to track, the financial expenses, resources, and staff hours that are being committed to campaigning and advocating for a police renewal levy. Basically, I'm interested in seeing how much money and how many hours have gone into this effort already. I'm just wondering mainly to see if this amount of effort from the city to convince people, if it's normal, standard practice, or proportionate, especially in regards to any of those in our community opposing this police renewal levy. I'm also curious to know if the city knows of any organized campaigns from other entities or elected officials in our region, either representatives in Tigard, Washington County, or the state of Oregon, that are speaking out against this police renewal levy at a scale that the city of Tigard and partners are. If the yes vote, for the police renewal levy polled between 52 to 67%, and there's minimal to no organized campaigns or elected officials publicly opposing this, and almost all leaders in the city of Tigard and political action committees are broadcasting their support for this, what is the rationale of continuing to invest city resources, finances, staff time to convince community members to vote yes on this? That's all I have. Thanks.
I can only comment on the efforts for the 2019-2020 local option levy, and I think time and energy and staff participation was much bigger than this effort. I think this effort has been different, probably a smaller group, but we've utilized different tools. We are tracking funding that we've spent. It hasn't been a lot, to be honest. I know there, Councilor Singh, you mentioned the magnets, and we can pull up the data for that. We've had pieces of collateral for both ballot measures, and they're strictly, I mean, they're informational. Our biggest focus was awareness, and we've made progress. 51% have heard, seen, or read something about this, and we have 38% who still don't know. So we can pull up some figures on cost to date. As far as opposition, we've seen a few posts. I don't know who they're from or if they're an organized opposition group, but it is on our radar. And as hopefully you know, and this group knows, once council deliberates, and if you choose to refer, the city goes neutral. We're all about just information, and we are prepared to do that, and are already looking at steps, anticipating that you know, there's the possibility you will refer next month. So we understand our position then is not advocacy, it's education and neutrality.
Yeah, Councilor Wolf.
So thank you, Assistant City Manager Nyland. And I think I just wanted to follow up from Councilor Singh's curiosities around that voices are reflected appropriately. And I appreciate the question and the comment. And I know we talked about that with the fall polling, and that some of those results are adjusted so that it reflects the city. And every voice, every opinion counts. But I also want to question on the second poll, was it adapted or adjusted? I think you had made a footnote to that regard, so that this is to inform in terms of what voters that are reflective of the city of Tigard. And again, wanting to be really mindful of the question and respect every feedback, and is certainly what Councilor Singh has shared in his perspective, but also wanted to look at it from a polling lens and a reflection of city voters. Thank you.
So we did a community survey in late summer that went to just citywide residents. These particular surveys are weighted for likely voters, just so we are kind of anticipating what that looks like come election time.
Councilor Singh, I just wanted to follow up and see if you had any additional questions after the comments on your questions.
No, not at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Youth Councilor Vogel?
Yeah, hopefully you guys can hear and see me. I just wanted to just mention that, as you know, like, I really appreciate all this information, and as I've been kind of reaching out to just people, youth in my community as well as the adults in my life, I think that it's been really helpful to have very clear and concise wording, which I just really appreciate. And that's kind of what I wanted to emphasize, like, on that connection of, as youth, you kind of feel like, you know, you can be a step behind on a really important really important information like this. So it's really helpful to have something as clear as like SROs, especially mentioned, because we have those connections as high schoolers, as middle schoolers, because we feel that that really can make a difference to us. And then that information gets back to parents, you know, voting members. So it's just, I really appreciated that, and I really emphasized that connection aspect.
Thank you. Assistant City Manager Nyland, do you feel like we gave you the guidance that you're looking for the renewal level?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you all provided comments that I think, and I'll let City Attorney weigh into if she feels like she has guidance developing the title and questions and summary, but you've indicated some key messages that you'd like to see reflected. And for Councilor Singh, we will follow up and get you that information that you inquired about.
Yes, so just to tack on to that, next steps. So we will take all of this information and put this into draft ballot titles for your review. We'll circulate that by email first, and then it'll be discussed at the February 6th council meeting, and then February 13th, hopefully if that all looks good, that will be the vote to actually refer. So you'll have a couple more opportunities to weigh in terms of themes or messaging style, all of that.
Did you, are there comments or guidance or things that stand out about the charter amendments?
I would just add, I think on the next steps, discussions and decisions, it just says themes for charter amendment passage does not result in an increase in tax rate. Details matter, but most important is this is not increasing the tax rate. So I think those are important things to get in there too. Yeah, Council President Hu?
Maybe I'm being paranoid, but I understand the benefit of saying no to increasing tax rate, but I seem to remember reading the ORS. It says it has to be, maybe I'm not quoting the right language, it has to be relevant or plain. So I don't know how, I know that no increase in tax rate help passage, but how thank you. So that's one of my concerns. The other concern is that how can we be absolutely sure passage of the charter will not increase our tax rate? For example, if we start to use Willamette River as drinking water source, don't we need to spend money on pipes and cleaning facility and stuff? And we need money for it. So maybe I'm thinking too far ahead. I'm just concerned first saying that no tax rate increase, and second, if we could say that legally, how can we be sure that there will be no tax rate increase with all the amendments to the charter? So I'm not looking for answer right now, but I'm just saying that that's my concern in my head. So if you have answer now, it's fine, but if not, we can take it up later. So thank you.
Yeah, so Council President, I can give a quick answer on that. So to the question about increasing taxes, so as you'll recall, Tigard levies the full amount of its permanent tax rate. And so in order to levy more taxes, we would have to do either a bond or a levy. And so so we can say with certainty that it will not raise taxes unless in the future we decide to do either of those things. Neither, the Willamette River is essentially, we have invested significant amount of money in that already. So that's not a major cost driver. So nothing that we foresee out of this measure would ever lead to a tax or a levy or a bond. So, so that's in response to that question. In response to the question about the will not raise taxes. So Tigard has done that in the past by adding that to a ballot title. And it was something that council felt strongly about doing. It was specifically tied to an urban renewal measure. So Tigard has done it before. In terms of relevancy, there is no clear-cut guidance as to what is or is not relevant. That's really up to the city to make an argument for or against. So I will defer to your guidance as to whether you think that that's relevant enough to put prominently in the ballot title, or if not, we can put that into the explanatory statement or summary. So there is no clear guidance on it. We'll defer to you on that.
Thank you, City Attorney. That's very helpful. And as to your second question about relevancy, personally, I will feel more comfortable if it's rephrased like not expected to have physical impact or things like that. Maybe that's not as attractive or sexy as no increase in tax rate, but I think that's, to me personally, that's more true, I guess that's the word. But the mayor and other city councilors may have different view on this. So, if they want to go with no increase in tax rate, so be it. But for me personally, I think saying no fiscal impact, or it does not expect to have physical impact, I think that's a more accurate statement. But that's me. No, thank you.
Right. So if I could respond to that point. So actually, there is a fiscal impact. Adding 2 counselors will have a fiscal impact, paying the stipends and some of the other changes, staffing potentially. So it will have a fiscal impact. It will not have a tax impact that we can foresee at this time.
Thank you so much for your guidance. Now I'm comfortable. Thank you.
Yeah, and it is interesting. I mean, I don't think of a charter as having anything to do with the tax rate, but, I also tend to be a local government nerd now with all the things that I know, and I try to think of, the general public, and when we're out having conversations, a lot of it boils down to what's that going to cost me, and that hinges on whether support or not. So I think while yes, it does sort of, I don't want to call it ridiculous, but it seems like something that's not associated with it. I think that's a really important question for our community to understand. Simply, I think that's the times that we're living in, just the huge sensitivity there is to pricing. But yeah, really great line of questions. Thank you. Okay. Councillor Singh, do you have anything to add on the charter, smarter charter?
No, thanks.
Youth Councillor Vogel?
I do not at this time.
Okay, thank you. Assistant City Manager Nyland, City Attorney Rahala, do you feel like you have what you need for no new taxes for the smarter charter?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your time and your comments.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We will move on to the joint meeting with the Budget Committee. Hello to all of you sitting around the table. Welcome. We have City Manager Reimer, who will be here to welcome everyone.
Thank you, Mayor. If we can have the next presentation pulled up, Eric. Give that a second. All right. You can move to the next slide, please. So as you just saw, we've, the last couple of years, we've called this Budget Committee Meeting 1. It's really an informational meeting. The last couple of years, you really haven't had a decision. Tonight, we are going to ask you for some guidance, if you will, and a recommendation to the City Council for their ultimate decision. So tonight, what we want to do is walk through a few things that are important for you to understand, just some of the budget priorities, things we're paying attention to as we move into the fiscal year 25 budget. Some of the updates from the subcommittee that has met, and then obviously the conversation about the Community Navigator Ad Hoc Committee. We have a couple of the community members here who will participate in that as well. Prior to doing that, there's a couple, we'll call them housekeeping items, which is to elect the chair and the secretary before we move into those items. So, Mayor, I'm going to turn it over to you at this point to start this. As we have the election of chair, we can then move the meeting to that person. So, Mayor,
Thank you.
it's all yours.
I believe we need to start with the Assistant City Recorder, or the Deputy City Recorder, to call roll for the Community Budget Committee members.
Thank you, Mayor. Clarissa Benfield,
Here.
Leah Voigt,
Here.
Scott Duty. It's marked as absent. Jake Schlack.
Here.
Kelly Pement,
Here.
and Courtney Cornejo.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So the first item of business is to elect a chair, and the role of chair is to have general directional power over the committee, and the chair will preside at all meetings and in consultation with city staff, set the agenda. So historically, this has been a community budget member, and so I think we can start by asking who has an interest in being chair, or if somebody just wants to go ahead and nominate someone, we can start there too.
Eric, can you change to the next slide, please? Thank you.
I'd like to nominate Jake Schlack.
One more slide.
Excellent. Is there so you want to nominate Jake Schlack for chair of the?
Yeah, sorry. I move to appoint Jake Schlack as Budget Committee Chair for the Budget Committee.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I second the motion. It's a very good idea.
And I assume by seconding the motion, you accept and think it's a good idea?
Yes, and Kelly, thank you so much for nominating me. I appreciate it, and I just want to say I had a really great time as committee chair last year. I found it to be really exciting work and very rewarding to see how the budget impacts the city and our community. So I would be honored to serve again.
Excellent. Thank you. Is there any discussion regarding the motion? Seeing none, will the Deputy City Recorder please conduct a roll call vote?
Mayor Lube,
Yes.
Councilor Singh,
Yes.
Councilor Wolf,
Yes.
Council President Hu,
Yes.
Clarissa Benfield,
Yes.
Leah Voigt,
Yes.
Jake Schlack,
Yes.
and Kelly Pemmon.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. The motion is adopted by unanimous vote of the Budget Committee. Congratulations, Chair Schlack. The meeting is now yours.
Thank you, Mayor Lube. The next item on the agenda is to appoint or elect a secretary for the Tigard Budget Committee. The role of secretary will be to keep a roll of committee members and to call roll when required. Are there any nominations for secretary? Mayor Lube?
I move to appoint Kelly Pement as the secretary for the Budget Committee.
I second that.
Excellent. There is a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion about the motion? Hearing nothing, I would like to ask the city recorder to please conduct a roll call vote of all voting members of the committee.
Mayor Lube,
Yes.
Councilor Singh,
Yes.
Councilor Wolf,
Yes.
Council President Hu,
Yes.
Clarissa Benfield,
Yes.
Leah Voigt,
Yes.
Jake Schlack,
Yes.
and Kelly Pemmon.
Yes.
Thank you.
The motion is adopted by unanimous vote of the Budget Committee. Thank you, everyone. The next item on the agenda is to appoint 2 Social Services and Community Event Grant Subcommittee members. Finance Director Kang, would you please be able to provide an overview of the role and responsibilities of this subcommittee?
Happy to. So the Social Services Event and Funding Subcommittee is comprised of 2 Budget Committee members and 1 City Councilor. And so the purpose of this meeting is to vote and make a recommendation on the various applications that we'll get for the Social Services and Community Event Grant Program. The commitment is the formal commitment is a 1 meeting on March 15th, which is a tentative date right now, but it is an all-day meeting event where we it's generally an all-day meeting. There can be anywhere from approximately around 30 applicants or upwards to 40 applicants of community organizations that come and apply for grant funding. And there will be further discussion on the program and updates later on in this presentation this evening.
Thank you, Finance Director Kang. So we will, start discussing which committee members we would like to have serve on the subcommittee. If there are any nominations, Councilor.
I apologize, Chair. I just wanted to comment as the thinking about the commitment. I appreciate Director King saying the 15th is tentative, but I'm hoping that we can kind of lock that, and then as our committee members ponder whether they want to do this, it's really important. It's a big commitment, and so I appreciate anybody that's willing to volunteer that time. But I think to be able to participate fully in that process is really important. So I just want folks to think about that. It's a great experience, so I don't want to discourage anyone. I just want folks to be thoughtful about the commitment. And I know life happens, but anyway, that's my 2 cents. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Wolf. I appreciate the sentiments, and I totally agree. It is a very rewarding experience to be part of the committee subcommittee. I was officially part of it on my first year as a budget committee member, and it was baptism by fire, so to speak. I remember being asked, Jake, how do you feel about $40,000 for this grant? And I thought, I am in way over my head right now. So it's a great opportunity to learn about the city, this particular aspect of the city budget. I'd like to suggest that Councilor Wolf be the city councilor member of the budget committee. We do have an update coming up about policies that are being, changes, where am I going with this? Launching a city policy, written city policy around community grants, and I think it would be great to have Councilor Wolf, who has been involved with that for the last year, to be part of launching it this year. Mayor Lube.
Yeah, so I will, this process is intent for the community budget committee members. As a city council, we have liaison assignments that are set for 2 years. And so lucky for you, she is your member for this next year.
One excellent taste you all have. Excellent judgment. All right. Well, I'd like to go around then and ask. I see, Leah Voigt, your hand is raised. We'll start with you.
Yeah, I am interested in being part of the process this year. I have experience working in nonprofits and doing community work, and I am interested in participating in this way.
Thank you, Leah. Clarissa, do you have any interest or availability to serve on the subcommittee?
Yeah, I'm happy to as needed, but of course, if anyone else wants to do it, that is fine with me as well.
Thank you. I know Scott is not here, so and he is a first-year budget committee member, so probably, yes, Eric.
If I could just comment on the date. So that set is tentative. If it is a Friday in the second week of March, if the subcommittee members find that date to be, if we can find some subcommittee members who could commit to that date, we're happy to set that as the firm date at this time.
Thank you, Leah. Just to backtrack slightly, I just want to confirm that you would be available for March 15th.
Yes, I checked my personal and work calendar, and at this time I am available and can block out and attend that full day.
Excellent. Clarissa, same question to you.
I am a bit more tentative on that date. I would have to confirm that I don't have work travel, so I'd have to confirm that later.
Thank you. Kelly Pemmond, are you interested and available?
I would be happy to serve, but I have no idea about availability at this time.
Thank you. And for my part, I would definitely be able to attend for the full day then, but I do understand if the budget committee would like to distribute responsibilities slightly, since I was just elected chair. So I will put that asterisk, but I could definitely attend and serve on that day. It's a lot like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. You're just looking around trying to read everyone, and you're like, did they raise their hand? Do they really want to talk? Based on the feedback of all the present voting members, it sounds like Leah Voigt and myself are two people who are interested, who do have March 15th for certain available. So I would like to motion to appoint Leah Voigt and myself to the Subcommittee on Social Services and Community Events. Is there a
second the
second?
motion.
Oh, thank you, Mayor Loop. Is there any further discussion? All right. Will the city recorder please conduct a roll call vote, please?
Mayor Lube,
Yes.
Councillor Singh,
Yes.
Councillor Wolf,
Yes.
Council President Hu,
Yes.
Clarissa Benfield,
Yes.
Leah Voigt,
Yes.
Jake Schlack,
Yes.
and Kelly Pement.
Yes.
Thank you.
The motion is adopted by a unanimous vote of the Budget Committee. Thank you, everyone. We will now be discussing the fiscal year 2025 budget priorities and items of importance, and I will hand it over to City Manager Reimer to begin this discussion.
Thank you, Chair Schlack. Eric, if you go to the next slide, please. Potentially 2 slides. And 1 more slide, please. Then we'll pause there. When I handed over to the council, or to the mayor, Lube, I jumped over the introductions. So I thought we could at least start, we can introduce ourselves as a professional team, and then especially for our new member, welcome again. It's great having you here. You could introduce yourself as well if you wouldn't mind. So Steve Reimer, I'm the city manager. I've been here just coming up on 3 years now. And so one of my main responsibilities is to work with the budget committee, all of you, to develop the proposed budget with all of my teammates to make the presentation that you'll see in a couple months from now.
Good evening. My name is Eric Hay. I'm the finance director. I've been in this capacity for 6 months now. It's approaching 6 months, I believe. But I've been with the city for almost 2 years now.
Hello, good evening. I'm Kalina Plath. I am the budget manager for the city, and I have been in this position for just about 14 months.
Hi, my name is Courtney Cornejo. I'm an alternate for the budget committee, and I was just appointed a month ago, so pretty new to the role and new to Tigard.
Yeah, we'll welcome again. If there's anything after tonight's meeting, if you'd like to sit down with any of us or a team's meeting or just have some questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us, and obviously the council and budget committee members also are there to help support you. So, yep, absolutely. And there's many other teammates that are involved. Assistant City Manager Nyland is here. Assistant City Manager Trich is on the call, as well as many others. Our police chief is here. Lindsay's here, and many others. So it takes the full team to develop the budget. And so what we want to do tonight is just provide just a high-level overview. I mean, it's really high level of just the things that we're paying attention to as we move forward with the proposed budget development, which we're doing now, and then we'll ultimately formally provide to all of you in a few months, and then we'll start the conversations from there. So the first, I think it's always important to remind ourselves that one of our main goals and responsibilities of the local government is to really be the stewards of the public funds. You've talked about it already. And if you go in just the finance area back over there, I always mean to count the awards, but there's many. There's a couple dozen awards at least on the walls that are reflected here, the long-term focus on that. Next slide, please, Eric. How many?
30 years.
30 years. Woohoo! 30 years is awesome. What else is awesome is recently, within the last year or so, we were upgraded from Standard & Poor's to a AAA rating. And a AAA rating is the highest rating you can get as a public agency. There's numerous that have it, but the percent of public agencies that have a AAA rating is quite small. And so Tigard should be proud of that. There's many factors that go into it, and one of them is the sound decision-making by the council that's here today, the councils that's been here in the past, as well as the team that's here today and the team that's been here in the past, as well as the budget committee members, to make sure that what we are doing really does relate to paying attention to our finances and making sure that we're strategic, that we're prudent, and that we're responsible. Next slide, please. So over the course of the last few years now, We have embarked on, those that were on the Budget Committee and Council a couple years back may recall when we first brought forward the priority of a long-term fiscal health. And so we've carried that forward for the past 2 fiscal years, and we're going to be carrying it forward into this year will be our recommendation. And so just to give you a sense of the things that we've accomplished in each of those phases. So the first year when we brought that forward in fiscal year 23, we developed and fully funded our ISF. So many of you may recall those conversations of best practices to have internal service funds. These are funds where we identify our existing assets and fleet, our facilities, and our IT equipment, and created funding schedules to replace them. What we were looking at achieving that first time was to get the system in place, hopefully start down the path, but have a multi-year plan to fund them. We were fortunate, working with the Budget Committee, working with the finance team at the time, that we were able to allocate resources immediately to that, and we fully funded it, which was a great step forward. During that same year, 2 other key positions were put in place. One was our System Development Charges, or SDC coordinator, who is in our finance department, and then our asset manager position in our Public Works Department for the millions of dollars of assets that we have. Both of those were strategic investments to make sure that we have a teammate directly responsible for 2 key areas within our operations. The current fiscal year 24, what we've called phase 2, a couple things that we did. We refined the ISFs that we talked about. We're continually working on that, putting in the policies, making sure they're updated, making sure that they're up to date. The long-term priorities were funded. Tyler, we're going to talk more about that this year. Houselessness are just 2 examples of things that we really knew we had to pay attention to in the Budget Committee and Council. They agreed. And then I'll go to the first one, our new proactive investment strategy. Thanks to Eric to my left and the team for their look at our investments. And I remember when he came to me and said, hey, I think we should be looking at our investments different. Do you mind if we move forward with a more proactive strategy? As you know from last year's budget process, we moved forward with an additional $5 million or even maybe a little more from our fund balances in that new proactive investment strategy. So kudos to Eric. But that's one more step in moving forward with that. And now we're being very mindful of our investments, even more so, and making sure that we can continue to invest it wisely and then have the interest earnings that you see help support our budgets. Next slide, please. And then now for fiscal year 23, phase 3. Eric's going to talk about some of these things coming up. We've always talked about our revenues first, but we're really emphasizing this year that it's revenue first with all the departments, making sure that internally we have a clear understanding of what we think the revenues are going to be, not only for the next year, but the years going out. What assumptions are we using? Things like the Washington County Library Services Cooperative, the WCCLS money, that's made by another board, so trying to understand that. Trying to understand some of the expenses that are coming in as well. But the revenue side, really making sure that we can pay attention to it. Even the public safety renewal levy, right? What assumptions are we making in our budget about those revenues moving forward? So we'll be clear with that internally. Then obviously when we come to the Budget Committee with the proposed budget, this year we plan to be very clear and transparent with some of the key revenues and talking through those with you. And then the second one is a zero-based budgeting approach. We've always been mindful of our numbers. But working with our new budget team here, Assistant City Manager Nyland, others, Emily, we really started to kind of foreshadow last year that we're going to move to this approach for this year. And so the departments have really been great at embracing that. Police is a great example of it, and thanks to the chief and his team for being out in front of this and working with our teams to really focus on zero-based budgeting to make sure that we have the resources we need to move forward, but we also don't appropriate too many resources areas that we think we can do it in a different manner. And our finance director is going to talk to you now about moving forward in that direction. So Eric, I'll turn it over to you.
If you could go to the next slide, please. So I'm talking a little bit more about the revenue first philosophy. So like Steve mentioned, revenue has always been an emphasis with the budget development process. But with this year, with the emphasis on revenues, we are taking an agnostic approach. Regardless of looking at expenditures, we want to look at revenues first as a standalone item. This is to develop our models further for revenue forecasting, and additionally to elevate the importance of revenue forecasting as a critical component of our annual budgeting process. And then informing all of our budget users to ensure that they fully understand what our resources are, so that we're building a coalition around same understanding of what our resource constraints are. Next slide, please. So on the zero-based budgeting, I'll talk about this a little bit further. So this is a new process change that we're launching in the fiscal year 25. So you can see some of the numbers up there. We have some items that are in blank. So unlike in prior years, again, we are always mindful of our budgets, but the process will be changing this year, where we start with all of our materials and service line items starting at zero, rather than starting with a base budget from the prior years. So this is to build up to meet our current service levels and to ensure that we are being mindful of every item and justifying what we are putting into our budgets and ensuring that it's reflecting what's actually being used, at the same time being able to meet our current service levels. Next slide, please. So now I want to talk about the whys and why we're going down this approach with the zero-based budgeting. So we have a graphic here. Might be a little bit difficult to see from this angle, but you can see the trends over time from going back from 2017 until 2023. So that includes a range that includes some of the pre-COVID years, and we see a trend where there's been consistent underutilizing of our funds, and it's starting to, you can see a trend of underutilization that exceed 10%. And for forecasting purposes, this has always created a negative outlook in the future years, particularly in the general fund, where you'll see in many examples of a fiscal cliff in the future years. And while we have never hit the fiscal cliff due to prudent budgeting and cost controls, strategic investments have always been difficult for us to make, as it has always been challenged to maintain current service levels based on the current forecast models that rely on base budgets. So I think it's important to explain again, maybe for some of the newer members, as a reminder, Measure 50 that was passed back in 1997 placed a cap on our property tax growth rate at 3%. That's a statewide measure. And while development in Tigard does add to that increase annually, historically it has only been about 0 to 1.5% per year. And the general challenge that the general fund faces is that our cost increases are generally more than 3%, 3 to 4% growth that you expect from the property tax per year. And I think in the more recent year, you can see during the high inflationary periods, it exceeded that greatly. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, so we are focusing on materials and services for the zero-based budgeting process, and this is a pilot to this approach. And you can see on the attached graphic here, the slide represents the savings in 2 budget categories. This is a diagram of the general fund. You can see that the column that is shaded in green, that represents the portion of budget savings that are related to materials and services. And while vacancy savings do drive a significant portion of our budget savings due to some of the challenges we had with hiring over the past couple of years, you can also see that materials and services do represent a significant cost savings in the general fund. Next slide, please. And then looking at the citywide, you can see kind of the similar graphic here. This is with all the funds citywide. You can see that the materials and services are much higher over the years. Next slide, please. So that was a little bit about the zero-based budgeting, and as Steve mentioned, there are a lot of things that we're being mindful for in the out years, especially in 2025 and beyond. From a macroeconomic standpoint, we're seeing things like the interest rates are dropping, and there's forecasted drops, which may decrease our interest earnings, which again has been a major boon to the city in the last 2 years. And then generally there are some general concerns about the economic forecasts and some uncertainty around that. 2 other major items I want to highlight are as Steve mentioned, the Public Safety Renewal Levy and the Washington County Cooperative Library Services. As the Public Safety Renewal Levy provides approximately $2 million of relief to the general fund to fund critically important positions within the police department, and then the WCCLS approximately funds about $4 million to the general fund. And there are, again, these are, especially on the WCCLS, those are discussions that are happening at the county level, and circumstances that are kind of outside of our control. Next slide, please. And so I won't go into each of these in detail, but on the expense side, I just want to highlight that there are significant initiatives that we're being mindful of, and the things that we're tracking on the horizon. And these are just a list of items that we're tracking. Next slide, please. And with that, I'll turn it over to City Manager Reimer.
So to conclude this section and then see if you have any questions, the two budget priorities that we've talked about internally to date are funding Tyler, now known as T2, and the mandates that are not currently funded. And so for those of you that were here last year, if we step back to last year and talk about our Tyler project, we had an assessment that we completed. Assessment said that we need to kind of step back, look at what we need, how we're set up as an organization, what resources do we need, and so we came forward to this group with a request of an additional $900,000 for this current fiscal year. Since then, our new IT director, Maya, herself, working with Kathy, working with many others, our core team, have continued to assess our needs. And so what we're doing is making sure that we fully understand all those resource needs for things like our legacy system. So we have systems in place today that we can't end until we bring Tyler on. It's fully functioning, right? So we're trying to understand what is the time we need to pay for those, what consultant services needs do we have, what type of needs do we have for what we call limited duration positions that help backfill so some of our lead team can be committed to the Tyler project. So we're working on that. It sounds like in the next couple weeks we're going to have that. And so when we come back to this group, unlike last year where we were just talking about Tyler, and we gave you some information, obviously, we're going to have it much more laid out clearly. You'll see where all the resource needs are so we can come to you with that. Why we've identified that internally as a main priority is since we are down that road, since it's such a significant enterprise change for us, that before we commit any other resources in the proposed budget, at least to all of you, we want to make sure that what Tyler needs has the funds to it, and then we can move forward with any other requests from departments. Kind of back to what Eric also talked about, just being with what we have from the revenue standpoint. So that's one thing, and then the second is we've asked all departments to come forward with any mandates that aren't funded or aren't fully funded, and these aren't these are mandates from other parties. Could be the federal government, could be the state, could be Clean Water Services, and making sure that we have the resources. Once again, the Budget Committee took great steps last year in some of these areas, especially as you look at our stormwater. We brought in 2 new teammates in our Public Works directly related to that to respond to some of these. But we know there are a few more things out there, so we wanted to make sure that we're aware of them, and then ultimately the Budget can be aware of them. So then once we have both of those, then obviously other things that are going to come out of your discussions and things that you've talked to us about already will also be included. But these seem to be the 2 things that before we can really move forward with anything else, we need to make sure that Tyler and our unfunded mandates are, we have the necessary resources allocated to those. So that's what we've been working on internally, as well as all the things that the operating departments need, right, as well to continue to meet community's expectations, city council's expectations, and the budget committee's expectations. I think that's the last slide on this section. Is that correct? All right, so let's pause there. If you don't mind, Chair, I'll turn it back to you. And if there's questions for us, just on this high-level information.
Thank you, City Manager Reimer, Finance Director Kang. So I'm just going to go down the list of all our committee members and just give everybody an opportunity to ask any questions or make any comments. I usually just start with the community members. So Clarissa Benfield, do you have any questions or comments?
Yeah, I'm just still trying to understand this zero-based budget, right? Starting at 0. So are you, and if you go back to like that summary slide, which I know might be a few slides back, so basically rather than putting in the run rate budget, you're saying that you start at a place of 0 and put in actuals, so you're avoiding the budget overflow?
Not quite. So everyone is starting with a zero-based budget with a zero line item on different expense categories. And based on meeting their current service levels, they are expected to, with an understanding of what their actuals were in prior years and actual needs, putting in a number there that meets what the current service levels requirements are.
So basically like forecasting off of the run rate with some level for inflation or something like that.
Correct.
Okay.
Mayor Lube, it looked like you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, just as a finance person, I think it's a philosophical difference. Instead of saying, hey, you have $800 to spend on pencils, you have to go to the budget and say, you know, we're going to need 40 pencils, we think, throughout the year at this rate, and it's going to be this. Because I think people tend to have, oh, well, we have room in the budget, so we can spend it, versus, hey, this is something that we know we're going to need. It's a real philosophical change in the way that budgeting is done.
And then it goes back into the general fund at the end if it's not fully utilized.
I think it depends on where it came from to begin with. But yes, if it came from the general fund, then that's where it goes back to.
Yes,
correct. Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you, Clarissa. Courtney Kohei? Oh.
I don't have any questions.
Thank you. Kelly Pement?
No, but thank you for explaining that a little bit more, both of you. That was really helpful.
Thank you. For my part, I don't have any questions, but I do fully support this philosophical change. As Mayor Lube put it, I think it's both prudent and sustainable going forward. So I look forward to seeing how this plays out during with the proposed budget for fiscal year 2025. Leah Voigt, do you have any questions or comments?
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to word it. I'm wondering, something I've seen in budgets in the past is when you have kind of that use it or lose it, like justifying based on last year's numbers, requests for funding for next year. And so the idea of, right, starting from zero, building up, saying, hey, this is what we need and why, it does sound, like that helps prevent some of that mindset. But I am curious in terms of kind of having to pitch it or justify it to city manager, kind of whoever's helping to put together the proposed budget, or unit directors, whoever, that's saying, no, actually that's too much, that's not realistic. Kind of what experiences people have seen with that, if the numbers from last year still get pulled in that way, even if they're not intended to. And then also the end of the year kind of spending of, right, oh, well, if we don't use this money this year, it all goes back to the pool where it came from, so let's spend it out, because our proposal might not be accepted next year, or things like that. I was kind of curious for Mayor Lube and for the finance team anyone else who has knowledge to comment, what kind of behaviors or experiences y'all have seen around those topics with this zero-based budgets approach.
Thank you. Budget Manager Plath, it looks like you're interested in fielding this one.
Thank you. So part of it, if you looked at where we had the savings in materials and services, and as Director King explained, we had close to 20% in savings in some departments. And so the departments are not looking at it as, oh, you know what, I still have this budget available, I need to spend it. What they're doing is they are being fairly prudent with their spending, but what's happening, as he explained earlier, King, is that we're projecting this cliff, and then departments are saying, hey, 5 years from now you're projecting a cliff, but you've been saying that for years. And we're not actually getting to it because we have this over budget. If per se. They're going through and looking at, well, we budgeted this amount, we need this amount, and we're asking them, please go back and look at it. Maybe you budgeted 20,000 for pencils, hopefully not, but really your pencil expenditure is only coming in at 12,000. So can you go back and look at what your actual need is going to be based on the values that you think it's going to be, and let's kind of right size that so that we're getting back to, and yes, we're starting with the zero line. Previously, they would get the budget from the previous year included in that line, and they would work off of that. We've wiped that out on what they're looking at, and they're starting with the zero and going back and just doing a little more research, a little more calculation to go, you know, this is really what we're going to need. And in some cases, maybe it is higher. Maybe they're really looking at it and going, you know, we're having a huge increase in insurance this year on this line item, so we're going to need to increase that, and it's not going to look like what the budget was last year. But we really want to right size each of those line items so that when we get to their budget, it is what they actually need to maintain services, and it's a little cleaner. And that as we're looking at the out years, we're actually seeing something a little bit closer. So we don't have that consideration that they're going to run to the finish line and go, oh, I didn't spend it, I'm going, because they haven't in the past. So they're really just taking a tighter look at those numbers and getting a little closer to what it's been versus looking at projections. Hope that helps.
Yeah, so from a beginning building the budget standpoint, yeah, absolutely was following that. So I guess this is more of a end of the fiscal year question, and so maybe now's not the time to ask it, but just looking at that, not to not use this approach here, because it sounds very relevant and appropriate. Just acknowledging the fact that in past years, right, unspent funds then became the beginning balances for next year. And so that also, my understanding is that helped, you know, not having that spend down, kind of use it or lose it, race to the bottom that other times happens in other places where they're like, oh no, we can't ask for more grant funding next year if we don't show that we used all our grant funding this year. And so it's more of a end of the budget year question, just thinking ahead, or just putting some consideration there as a general thought. But yes, as a beginning of the budget year, building the budget, absolutely on board.
Mayor Lube.
Yeah, I just want to add that I think this philosophical change really requires trust between the departments and the finance team and the decision makers. And, you know, everything has pointed to the many budgets that I've sat here, you know, that we have that. And you can see that in the past performance of our financials, where departments don't say, oh gosh, well, I haven't spent 20% of my pencils, so I better go buy a bunch, because the team is going to say, you can't have the same amount because you didn't spend it. I think it's really, truly right sizing the budget and saying, what are you actually using? What do we have money for? As we're looking at, again, these unfunded mandates and T2 and these sorts of things, like how much money do we actually have? And looking forward, we're projecting, because if we continue to project in the same way, that's why we have this cliff of we're assuming we're spending more and more each year. But the truth is, when you look at the history, we're not doing that. And so rather than scaring everybody by saying every 5 years from now there's a fiscal cliff, there's not actually one. So having that trust of saying, what do you actually need? What is this true financials and this budget going to look like going forward? I think gives our community a more accurate picture, and it gives this budget committee a more accurate picture of where we think the money is actually going to be spent, rather than departments trying to hoard it. Because I think they probably feel comfortable saying, hey, you know, we have this planned this year and we're going to need a little bit more in this category, but not over here. But again, it's that trust relationship that nothing has indicated to me that we don't have that here. But I'm speaking for myself, not the committee.
Thank you, Mayor Lube. Leah, do you have any additional questions or comments?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Youth Councilor Vogel?
I don't have any at this time, but I just really appreciate this information. And I think just from my perspective of just kind of getting used to all this and learning, I really appreciate it. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Finance Director Kang? No, is this, okay. I saw a green light over there, and it's, you know, like I said earlier. Mayor Loop, do you have any questions or comments?
No, I don't have anything. Thank you.
Thank you. Council President Hu, do you have any questions or comments?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so I seem to remember internal priority, Tyler last year was a big chunk of budget taking out every department. So can you remind us, would that still be a priority for the next fiscal year? And okay.
Yeah, I would say it's going to be a priority for the next couple fiscal years.
Okay.
And that's what we're trying to put together next year, as well as what the next couple of years looks like. So when we come to the budget committee, we can talk for a 2 to 3 year period, and then plan for that in our budget forecast, where you'd see the resources required for Tyler. Conceptually, at this point, every year would decrease to the point where the funds that we need to maintain the system, et cetera.
Okay. Yeah, I understand T2 is important, but if it's a priority for many years, I probably will have concern, but we will cross the bridge when we come to it.
and just for clarity, and we'll get into this more, why it has a multi-years is because there's many phases to this. You know, Tigard is doing a wholesale change of almost every system we have, which is probably greater than many places. And so just making sure, like we did the first phase of finance, make sure every time we're we're ready, and 2, it's quality. The next one is our payroll system. And that has to, right, we can't miss payroll. And so, and then it gets into utility billing, asset management. So there's just many pieces that have to sequentially roll out, and they build off each other to a point where then, and there's also the change management internally, but it's importantly making sure our community understands, like utility billing is another great example of that, our permit process that we're gonna have. So there's a lot, and we'll try to talk with the budget committee about this. You see why we're laying out. That's what Maya and the team are doing now, is trying to get realistic dates. And then from that starts to set the schedule for like legacy systems, so when we can shut those off and stuff. So much more to come.
Thank you. And I'd just like to sort of piggyback on that and just say, like, my professional background is more on the tech and IT side of the house, so I appreciate the thoroughness with that the city is going through, because rushing through a technology migration, especially when it hits so many different departments like Tyler, if you rush through that, there can be some pretty bad consequences. So I appreciate hearing the thoroughness and taking your time to make sure it's right. Councillor Singh, do you have any questions or comments?
No questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wolf.
Thank you, Chair. Great presentation. I'll try to be concise and quick here so we can continue moving forward. So yay, love the idea of some of those program trackings, and I look forward to the updates on some of those investments that we'll be making and then associated with those costs. And another request for our mid-council goal check-in, would love to dig in a little bit more on Tyler, because it is a huge systems change, and not for us to get too much in the weeds, but to really understand that whole picture of how we're moving. So that's a plug for that. And then also to the two of you, when the budget committee meets kind of at that first time, really appreciate the charts on the savings from zero-based budgeting, but it leaves me curious and why, especially when we look at citywide annual budget savings. I'm surprised, like at materials and services, how high that is. So it just makes me curious, what did we learn from doing a zero-based budgeting? What just kind of rolled because it was there versus doing this new strategy? What information have we gained, and how does that change our practice? So I would love to hear that. And then associated with that is also around FTE. Right. I mean, that's a major driver as well. My background, obviously, way more in education world than it is in city government. But the reason I'm asking is around FTE. Why do we have open FTE for so long that generate the savings? Are we staffing, compensating, all those other root causes of maybe why FTEs are open? How do we learn about that as well? So those are the things I'm curious about. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to close out this item, I'd like to just say to Courtney that, one of our traditions is we have to say Tyler at every single meeting that we have. So you've heard it many times, and I think that's the appropriate word to end this on is Tyler. So you are now fully inducted into the Budget Committee. We will now be moving to our next agenda item, which is to discuss the Community Navigator Ad Hoc Committee recommendation. City Manager Reimer, Program Manager Ezell, and Ad Hoc Committee members Sasaki and Brown will provide an update from the Community Navigator Ad Hoc Committee.
Good evening, Budget Committee. I am Kim Ezell, Program Manager Strategic Initiatives, and I use she, her pronouns, and I was lucky enough to facilitate the Ad Hoc Community Navigator Committee with Kelly Piment, Jimmy Brown, Valerie Sasaki, Councilor Singh, and then City Manager Steve Reimer. If you remember, a few months ago, this group formed the ad hoc committee in order to add some specificity to the Community Navigator recommendation that came out of PSAB, the Public Safety Advisory Board. Tonight, we have 2 members of the ad hoc committee who have come to deliver a presentation and their recommendation from the 4 meetings we did over the end of last year. So with that, I will turn it over to Valerie Sasaki and Jimmy Brown to do their presentation and present their recommendation.
Mayor, councilors, Budget Committee, thank you so much for having us. I know it's late, so we're going to try and keep this short. I know everybody's got other things they'd rather be doing than hanging out here listening to us talk about things, but my inner finance nerd was kind of thrilled by all of this. A couple of the themes that I'm hearing from your discussion tonight are same as last year is maybe not the best approach to things. And I think that's where the concept of zero budgeting comes from. And same as last year was my nemesis when I was in public accounting. So I fully support that. And then the other theme is that Tigard's community is not a monolith, right? We have a diverse community that changes over the years. And I think one of our intuitions coming out of the Public Safety Advisory Board and the root of this, the genesis of the recommendation for a community navigator position was the acknowledgement that, when I bought my house back in 2003, the composition of Tigard was a certain thing. And here we are in 2024, and the composition of Tigard is not that thing anymore. And so, 21 years from now, the community, our Tigard population will be different from where it is now. And so our intuition was that and working with Chief and the other folks from the city who we were having these discussions with, was that it's very difficult to know where blind spots are. And so our intuition was that there was a role to be played for helping community members who were not part of the majority community, who may be unhoused, who may be diverse in other ways. Our BIPOC communities are continuously evolving BIPOC communities. Navigate city systems and figure out, how do I interface with the city in a way that makes sense and achieves my goals and allows a positive relationship to evolve between these communities and the city. For a whole variety of reasons, that's good. Public safety and reporting of issues, obviously, this is some of the major issues that communities have encountered over the last few years, is this conflict, right, between communities and the government that is supposed to represent them. And I think it's important that we acknowledge, and so we started with Kim facilitating very ably our discussions. We started our discussions by looking at the good things that Tigard is already doing. Judy Martin from the Community Engagement Coordinator, Tina Escalara from Economic Business Services, and Officer Brian Orth, who is a focused patrol officer, all came and talked with us about the really important work that they're doing to interface with specific communities that they interact with on a day-to-day basis, right? And so things like Spanish language services and outreach to Hispanic business owners, you know, Officer Orth talked about some of the challenges he's had dealing with the unhoused population and how those relationships have become more positive, which, you know, we've heard anecdotally through a lot of other channels, you know, over the last 2 years. So, you know, and I think that it's important that we acknowledge that, because I think we're coming at this discussion from a point of assuming positive intent, right? We're assuming that the city wants to do the right thing and that all of the people here in this room want to do the right thing. So, you know, but we still don't know where our blind spots are. And that's the problem, right? As our communities continue to evolve, as our, you know, we were talking about all the services available for Hispanic business owners, but we know that there are Korean and Southeast Asian community members who may not be as fluent in English as other folks. We know that there are African American community members who may, you know, not be represented in some of these discussions that we've been having. It's not, our BIPOC communities, our able communities, our unhoused communities are not a monolith. They're not a homogenous group of people that you can say, this is how we interact with that. And so, you know, when we were having these discussions, I think what really came out of it was that Budget Committee and Council's concern with our initial recommendation was that there was a lack of specificity around our recommendation to have a community navigator. And I think that's fair, you know, because I think that we don't know what we don't know. And how do we empower the people who are already doing the good things to communicate with each other, share best practices, and see, oh, I'm doing this for this group over here, how do I reach this group over here? And so I think that's really the framework of the discussions that we were having. You know, Kim was very good at keeping us on schedule and on time. So I tend to like to talk, and so there's a conflict there inherent. But I think we were like, how do we reframe this discussion? And coming out of it, we have a recommendation that Jimmy's going to talk to that I think will bridge the gap between what our anecdotal understanding of these challenges are and the future of where Tigard can go and how we can continue to create these resilient systems that will not be same as last year. Yes, please. Next slide.
Good evening. I am Jimmy Brown, and I'm a resident of the Tigard community. That's okay. We're both residents. I want to preface this with, one, saying that we are all on a journey. And this journey for us began February 8th of 2022, when the PSAB requested through a recommendation that the City of Tigard create a position and empower a volunteer board to utilize a community-centered lens to assist community members in navigating the government systems of Tigard and fostering trust through meaningful conversation by meeting people where they are. This role would be a connection point between community members and the city. And in that halcyon moment, we felt empowered that we could connect with council and the budget committee to ask them to take a serious look at this particular recommendation. Fast forward to 2 years, we're now in 2024, almost 2 years to the date of when that recommendation came forward. I say that to let you know that that's what good process is all about. We knew that our lived experiences professionally and personally this was not going to be an overnight activity, that we would get this particular activity through the city council processes in 6 months, 8 months, 10 months, 12 months, okay, 2 years. But the point is that the process helps to refine the work that we want this position to do. Earlier in your presentations tonight, you spoke about trust. And I think and you were talking about trust as it relates to the public safety levy. And this is part of the companion pieces to trust in government. When government comes to community members and says, we want your input, community members hear that we want to share in influence and possibly share in decision-making with city government leaders. And it is this type of activity that allows us to do this, to begin to share those decision-making activities and to share the influence and to build the trust that community members can have with the city. But we're not asking right now for a community navigator. Why? Because we have put that on the table. But again, we have processed ourselves through discussions, through deliberations, and said, as Valerie so eloquently stated, we don't necessarily know what we know. We don't know where the gaps are. We know there are gaps. We know that the work that the city staff, as you call teammates, have performed has been awesome. We sat and listened to heartfelt discussions on how they do the work that they do. And yet we still can come away and say, but where are the gaps? We know that much of that activity is almost individually oriented, meaning that they are heartfelt, they are connected, they are part of their individual values, beliefs, and that goes into the work that they do. But our question about a gap is that a strategic discussion? Is that a strategic activity? Is it something that permeates the entire city government? Or is it because of the wholesomeness and the orientation of the staff, by gosh, I am going to get out there and I'm going to make these connections with these folks. And so we said, this recommendation really is an important complement to the work that the city is already doing in the equity space to ensure that all members of the Tigard community have a voice in their government and access to services, resources, and information. Further, we want to be able to provide additional opportunities to connect with broad base of community members, inclusive of communities of color, non-English speaking, limited English speaking community members, differently abled, elder, youth, and business communities, as well as others that I have not named. We want to be able to examine the connection points between key community organizations in the city, Tigard-Tualatin School District, City of Tigard. Those are organizations that are walking down very similar pathways. Where do they intersect? We know they intersect at school resource officers, but where else do they intersect? Because the people who are looking at government services are also looking at educational services. And some of the very same issues that are being faced at the government level are also being faced in the school district level. Examine those connection points, and in so doing, we believe that this will become a much more inclusive community that I have heard many of you speak on over the last couple of years. So our recommendation, very simple. Next slide. Oh, I got to tell somebody. Next slide, please. Here we go. To fund an external consultant to review Tigard's current external engagement and outreach efforts using an equity lens and offer recommendations for a path forward. That looks different than we want a community navigator. But we got to this point, we have come to this point because, again, as Valerie said, even within the PSAP, we didn't know what we didn't know. But we are ready and willing and able to work with the Budget Committee and with City Council to help identify those gaps that exist inside of our organization that can hinder the inclusiveness that we so valiantly seek. And so with that, Steve?
Next slide, please, Eric. Thank you, Valerie and Jimmy. So I'll just conclude with some of the next steps to consideration and then obviously open it up for the questions you may have of our community members, of us, and Kim can probably join us up here as well. So, so you've heard the recommendation to fund an external consultant, as Jimmy just said. And so really tonight, what we're looking for the Budget Committee, because the Budget Committee is not the decision-making body, correct? And so tonight, since the ad hoc committee started here a few months back, what we're looking for is the consideration of the recommendation and forward your thoughts and opinion to the City Council. So that could be, we agree with the recommendation and we believe that the council should consider this in a meeting in the near future and move forward with that. The moving forward then is there's a funding piece to it, or it could be something different. So I just wanted to, that's an example. And then if you are suggesting that it's approved by the council, adopted, and then we start a process, what the ad hoc committee said from a timing standpoint is they would prefer the consideration that it happens during this fiscal year. And so what we would be recommending from our standpoint is, as you may recall from last year, when we established the Pandemic Relief Fund. The original funds come from the ARPA dollars of the federal government. They're now moved into our Pandemic Relief Fund, that you would utilize some of those budgeted dollars to fund this study, and we'd start the process during this fiscal year. If you feel that this recommendation is something you want to move forward, but you'd like it to be considered next year, during this meeting, the Budget Committee cannot consider next year's fiscal budget yet. You have not received the proposed budget. So if that were the case, then we would ask that you ask us to include that in the proposed budget for consideration with all other matters. So, but tonight you wouldn't be able to discuss fiscal year 25. So the first thing is you have the recommendation in front of you. It's that recommendation, or if there's something else you wanted to move forward. And then 2 would be the timing of whatever that recommendation is. So I will, hopefully I didn't make that more confusing. I'll turn it over to you, Chair Schlack, and we're all here for.
And just to make sure I'm writing this down correctly, I understand we want to consider the recommendation and the timing of it, but the options, if the committee were interested in pursuing this recommendation, then the motion would be to refer this recommendation to the Tigard City Council for consideration.
Correct, and then we would, in short order, bring that forward to the City Council.
Thank you. Want to make sure the wording is correct there. I'd like to start with Councillor Singh as one of the additional members of this ad hoc committee and hear his perspectives on the recommendation.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I just really want to give a lot of gratitude and thanks to Valerie and Jimmy, for the comments and for really just staying engaged and bringing their full selves in this process. I really enjoyed hearing from both of you and your perspectives, and just want to say thank you. PSAB was also formed after we all witnessed the murder of George Floyd. After that, everyone remembers January 6th, 2021 because of the Capitol attacks, but some of us remember that also what happened in Tigard that day, where 26-year-old Jacob McDuff was killed by a 14-year veteran Tigard police. We also passed a police levy the prior year when that happened to resource de-escalation, but that's another discussion. There are 2 things I would really like to address, though. Number 1 is the framing of why we should be working on this right now. And the other concern we've heard is that isn't this work already being done with DEIB manager Kurt and his team? So in addressing the question of urgency, I would frame this as a long emergency. I don't see this as something we can put a quick Band-Aid on or try to make a first aid kit for. These issues are systemic and can take, historically, as we've seen, 10, 20, 50 years or longer. It has taken, over 60 years for a person of color to be on Tigard City Council, but I'm not sure if that's even true, because I don't know if we've kept track of that data or information. So with addressing issues like this, if our leaders that are elected, continue to strive for a more multicultural, multiracial democracy, and based on what we've seen historically and in our present, we will likely, take 2 steps forward and 1 step back on this issue around community accessibility to civic processes, resources, services, information. So my point here is that, if anyone is, arguing to delay this process for another budget cycle, to me, that's totally acceptable. But for me, is what the question I would ask is, why wait? The other argument that this work, the argument is that this work is already being done, and then that Kurt and the DEIB team are already doing this work. And that's true to a certain extent. In August of 2023, he released an action plan, and the recommendation that this Community Navigator Ad Hoc Committee has been proposed has the ability to really supplement some of the actions in that plan to bolster the original PSAB recommendation, which was to focus on creating a position to meet people where they are and be a connection point between community members and the city. Many of the action items in the Racial Equity Action Plan are focused internally within Tigard City government, and most of those responsible for guiding conversations and empowering team members to complete actions are internal and exclusively designated to government staff. So some of the arguments brought up last budget cycle was that having a person in this position would be a heavy lift or for solely one person, that turnover could reduce trust, and also institutional knowledge and connections could be erased if someone left that position, and that all Tigard staff, including city councilors, should and could be playing a community navigator position, and many already are. So this proposal that we're recommending seeks to determine if those arguments against having a specific position are true and valid in the context of our city government and current processes. But this recommendation and next steps could also help take action to fulfill many of the short, medium, and long-term action items in the Racial Equity Action Plan that are to be completed by 2025. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Singh. Kelly Pement, you were also on the ad hoc committee, so I'd love to hear your perspectives as well.
Hello, everyone. So I was also on this, and I was the no vote, so that was not the best fun position to be in on a subcommittee of this nature, but it was a great experience, and so thank you, first of all, for asking me to do this. I have, since the recommendation shifted from being whether to fund a community navigator position to whether to fund an external consultation firm to come in and assess, I think I've struggled a lot, and I think I'm still struggling, and that's why I'm not able to give you a really good, clear, articulate view on how I feel right now, because I feel like there are so many pros involved with funding this external group, in that we could learn about gaps, like we could learn about some really interesting opportunities within the community to build that trust and to build that engagement. So that's my pro column. And then my con column is, it does seem like this work is already being done, but not just being done, it's in the infancy stages of being done. And to me, to bring in an external source at this time seems like it could cause more opportunity for miscommunication. And I don't know if that's a good reason or not to not do it, but it's one of the things that I'm definitely struggling with. That, and when I asked Kurt specifically if this was something that he felt like his teams, like the work that we're talking about now, if he felt like this was work that his teams were capable of doing, he ultimately seemed to indicate that that was the case. And from my perspective, there's something really empowering about having your team believe in you, which sounds really Pollyanna, so sorry about that. But to me, bringing in an external person to kind of double check that at this stage of the game where we're just starting that work, seems like that would be demotivating. And those are my pros and cons. So I'm still not sure where I'm at with it. So I wish I had something better or more inspiring to say. That's it. Sorry, Tyler. All right.
Thank you, Kelly. As you mentioned, you were the one no vote that was appointed to the ad hoc committee, so I appreciate you bringing those perspectives as well, because as we know, the original recommendation did get voted down, and I think it was important to have those perspectives. Courtney Conejo, I would love to hear your perspective as the fresh face to the entire situation and what your sort of thoughts are. I think the city teammates and the ad hoc committee members have done a pretty good job at explaining the timeline of how we got to tonight and providing some of that history, which I think is beneficial. And I'd love to hear your take on it.
Yeah, thank you. I think that it sounds like it's still a pretty new thing that is just getting started, kind of like what Kelly was saying, just starting out this early. I could see it being a pro also because then you have direction for where you're going in the future. But I also think, I don't know if it would be a priority for this fiscal year or not.
Thank you, Courtney. Leah Voigt, I see you have your camera on. I'd love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I was someone who supported funding the city navigator position in the last funding cycle. So I've been on board with this for a while. The two biggest pieces that I see as the reasons that I support this proposal as it's currently being offered is the timeline and the external factor. And these are things that as I watched the ad hoc committee meet were the ones that struck me the most, that I agree that Kurt and the DEIB team within Tigard are doing the work. And I agree and I understand that these things take time. I also agree that the current being within the system, that the current approach kind of has to be, right, let's clean house, let's learn that means something different in business. My apologies. Sorry, did not mean it that way. Let's look at ourselves, right? Let's learn the language. Let's make sure that we are establishing things so that they are systems wide and they are standardized so that we can, make sure we're all moving forward together. And because those things take time and because we are laying the foundation there, I am worried that it then becomes another 2 years before we're ready to turn that external, to say, okay, well, now that the team is in a good place and the city is ready and we have the shared language, now let's talk about how we engage with the community. And I know it's not that cut and dry, and I know that it will be integrated throughout the process. And if we can have parallel systems going on, Kurt working from the inside and team and consultants working from the outside, then that really allows us to tackle both goals at once. I think when it comes to equity, we've seen over and over again, timelines get pushed out. Yes, I agree that's important and we'll do that next year, and we'll do it the year after that. And this is right, not just Tigard, this is historically. And so I don't want us to continue down that path, right? We have an opportunity here to say we're making this a priority now, in adding on to all of the things that the city is already doing to say we're making this a priority now. And so, right, let's go all in. Not to suggest that the city of Tigard is not already all in. So let's bolster that, right? All of that work that's already being done. So I would support adding it to this fiscal year, to not wait until next fiscal year. I also, the purpose of the external piece, right? Two ways, both this idea of it being kind of like an auditor has been brought up, right? When we started Tyler, we contracted with organizations that knew Tyler, that oversaw Tyler, that said this is the best way to make the transition. We're doing this for other systems and other changes within the government, so let's do this. And that idea, right, it was originally discussed as an ombuds position, and right, something very distinct about an ombuds position is that it is that liaison position. It is recognizing the needs and being there to field the needs of the community, to bridge that with the organization that it's working for, to be a watchdog. It's kind of like an attorney general position as well, that it's, or the city lawyer, city attorney within Tigard, right, is currently in its own department, so that it's not under the purview of other departments, because it needs to be independent, and there can be conflict of interest there in other ways. And so I think that having this be an external piece really builds that, and right, it increases our capacity. So it allows Kurt and his team to continue doing the really great work they're doing, and do this alongside with a slightly different focus, so that we can really come together and implement things in a more timely manner, because we know that there are so many people in this community and nationwide and worldwide that have been waiting for these changes to be made, and this increase in equity, and to move from concept to action. I think as Kurt discussed in his presentations as well, that's part of the DEIB work that the city is doing, and that move from concept to action is so essential. And so I think that any way that we can accelerate that process, even if it means parallel processes, I support that. I also want to reflect on a conversation of that I had recently in a situation where I was that I was in a situation where there was a significant power differential, and I named that, hey, as we come into this conversation, I just, want to point out that this is how I'm feeling right now, and I'm very aware that I have a lot less power and decision-making ability and security than you, the person I'm talking to. And they, really wanted to reassure me that, right, the fact that we could kind of jump levels showed the open door and showed the welcoming, and right, that it wasn't being gatekept. And while I truly did appreciate that, and appreciated the sentiment, also that idea that the person with more power doesn't get to be the one who comments on how safe the other person feels. And so I think within the city of Tigard and this work as well, again, really having that opportunity for someone who's external, someone who can see things differently. And right, we as the committee, team members as well, are working inside the system already, in a system that people may or may not feel safe interacting with, or comfortable or 100 different words. And so I think this also continues to bolster that effort, that I do really think the team is doing amazing work. And I think this can be a really good compliment. So I am in support of that for those reasons. And I think that the use of ARPA funds is really appropriate because we know that the negative impacts of the pandemic, whether it was health, whether it's financial, hit vulnerable communities at much higher rates. And so I just want to throw that piece in there. Thank you so much. I know, thank you so much for listening and allowing me to share.
Of course, thank you, Leah. Clarissa Benfield, do you have any questions or comments?
No, I think everyone covered it pretty well. Lots of really good comments. I mean, I definitely lean more towards the side of support with moving forward sooner rather than later and waiting. So really good comments from everybody, but nothing additional to add.
Thank you, Clarissa. For my part, I was also a no vote on the Community Navigator recommendation last May, but I was a yes vote for forming the ad hoc committee, and I raised my hand and I said I was a no vote, I want to learn more. And I did, there's a convenient ice storm for learning more about this and watching every minute of the recordings, which I did. Convenient for that purpose, not convenient in any other way, I assure everyone. And I watched every minute of the recommendations because I hate to put it this way, the conversations that we had last budget cycle kind of left a bad taste in my mouth. I think it felt like this topic, for better or for worse, was kind of sprung upon the budget committee, where we were just sort of like, hey, we need to consider this headcount recommendation. Everyone was like, wait, what are you talking about? Let's back up. And I think between public testimony we received and information that we got from city teammates, it became sort of tricky to figure out what do we need to consider. And I think that left a bad taste in my mouth, and I think that was part of the context of the discussions that we had at the time. So I wanted to learn more because of that and sort of get to the facts of the situation. So I listened to every minute of the recordings, and I thought, I learned a lot. I learned a lot about the perspectives that were coming from the PSAB members who wanted to have the Community Navigator position. I also appreciated the members of the committee sort of stepping back and saying, hey, our original recommendation didn't get through. Let's look at first principles. What are we trying to achieve here? And coming up with a modified recommendation that I think still achieves the ultimate sort of end goals that you all have for the community. So I really appreciate you all having those conversations and your advocacy over the last year, especially with the budget committee. As far as what I support, I've sort of thought a lot about how I want to proceed. And this entire meeting I've been looking at our community promise, which is right across from me, right over there. And, equity, engagement, and economy are three of the E's in our community promise. And I think this recommendation is fully, in keeping with it. I can justify the financial expense to a taxpayer. I think since we're not creating a structural recurring expense for something that, we're stop pausing saying this is a one-time expense, let's figure out where the gaps are. Let's get this information. I think, especially since it's external focused, I think that's appropriate. So I was a no vote last time, but I'm a yes vote for it in the current fiscal year. And that was my thought process for it. So thank you everyone for listening. I'd like to hand it over. Mayor Loop, do you have any thoughts?
Thank you. I appreciate the recommendation and I support it. I think it's a great idea to go back, and I think we talk about being a data-driven organization and really having the data to understand. I sort of think of this as like a sliver of our performance audit, right, that we continue to do in the city to make sure that we're efficient and doing good things. This is a performance audit of our communication and our outreach and the way that we connect with our community. And so I support it. I support doing it now rather than waiting and using pandemic relief funds. Technically not ARPA. So it's important for individuals in our community who think we technically still have ARPA dollars. We don't, those are gone. These are now pandemic relief funds, to move forward with that. So thank you for the work. Thank you for understanding our perspective and our confusion and wanting I think this is a great path forward for our community.
Thank you, Mayor Lube. Council President Hu?
Me? Oh, thank you. Well, thank you, Valerie and Jimmy and Kelly and Councilor Singh for being on the subcommittee, ad hoc committee, sorry. I watch every single minute of it, and I was telling our city manager that I really looking forward to the next meeting or the next episode, because like watching a drama show where I don't know where it's going to go, and I really appreciate everybody keeping an open mind. Like Kelly, I have concern because on the other hand, I do realize there are gaps, right? At those times when I have to go to Sherwood to celebrate Chinese New Year and wondering why we don't have one in Tiger. That's weird. Or, you know, I'm a city councilor and I'm a lawyer, but once in a while when I see Tiger police car driving next to me, I get nervous. No offense, Chief. It's, you know, being an immigrant, being a person of color, being a gay person, those instincts just kick in when I see a police car, even though I do realize I'm in a position of power and I am a lawyer for 20 years, so I do know how to defend myself if needed to. But so I understand that if you are a more recent immigrant who doesn't speak English and who never went to law school or college, you know, you would be your life would be worse off, you know. But on the other hand, like Kelly, I understand the city's DEIB effort is just at its infancy, and so I do worry hiring an external consultant will create unnecessary conflict. I'm a lawyer and I'm a regulatory lawyer, so by default, I'm an external consultant hired to find fault within a company. And I know that, you know, if I don't say something is wrong with the company, I feel like they pay me for nothing. So I am afraid that this external consultant will come back and nitpicking and say things wrong, which may not be necessarily wrong, or maybe it's just being patient, or, you know, or create a conflict. Like, I don't want to air any dirty laundry like our Tyler experience with the external consultant. So I do have concern about that. And yeah, and my question is, you know, many of you assume that this would be a one-time expense, but as Valerie pointed out, Tiger is constantly changing. So are we going to hire this external consultant every couple of years? Wouldn't that be a recurring cost anyway? Or would you accept if this external consultant's recommendation is that, no, we don't need this communicator navigator position. We just need to make some changes to our external system. Would you accept that recommendation, or just keep pushing for community navigator position? So I am conflicted. I'm not sure how I want to proceed at this point. You know, I'm afraid of being judged as I'm not being compassionate. I'm not really a minority if I don't support this, but I have to speak from my heart, right? So I do have concern. You know, this is not just a throw the money at the problem thing. I do want to see solid solutions if we do spend this money. And right now, I'm just not sure that's going to be the case. So Kelly, you're not alone. So if we are the minority, so be it. So that's my comments. So thank you.
Thank you, Council President Hu, and I appreciate your concerns as well. Those were some concerns that I grappled with as well. So I think it's useful to have this conversation and sort of express those viewpoints. Councilor Wolf.
Yeah, I'll be really brief, given that we still have some things on the agenda we need to get through. So the first thing I want to say quickly is I do want to emphasize the terrific work that our Tiger team has been doing to be very mindful and I believe really caring about how we do better for our community. And so shout out to Kurt and really everyone in our teams that care deeply and passionately about serving Tigard. Having said that, I'm just going to go back to where we started. Valerie and Jimmy, you spoke so eloquently as to the why and how we've grown and what we need. That I support what you said. I'm right there, and I have nothing to add. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wolf. Youth Councillor Vogel.
Yeah, similar to what Councilor Wolf said, just thank you, and I can tell the dedication has really been there, and not only just to come from a business standpoint, but a personal standpoint, and just really that it reflects how it's being looked at and how it's being treated. And I do appreciate the perspectives and the questions posed by Council President, who I think that was really interesting and something for me to think about. But I can see the support for this right now.
Thank you. Are there any further questions or comments? All right, well, it sounds to me like there is a consensus among the Budget Committee members for referring this recommendation to the Tigard City Council for funding in the current fiscal year as was proposed. So as chair, I'd like to entertain a motion from one of the members to proceed with that recommendation.
I'm normally the one looking at everybody. I move to recommend to the Tigard City Council that we move forward with the recommendation of funding $150,000 out of pandemic relief funds for an external consultant.
Thank you, Mayor Lube. Is there a second?
I'll second.
This is Leah Voigt. Oh.
Thank you. Councillor Wolf seconds. Will the city recorder please call a roll call vote, please?
Mayor Lube,
Yes.
Councillor Singh,
Yes.
Councillor Wolf,
Yes.
Council President Hu,
No.
Clarissa Benfield,
Yes.
Leah Voigt,
Yes.
Jake Schlack,
Yes.
and Kelly Pement.
No.
Thank you.
Thank you. I counted 6 yes votes and 2 no votes, so the motion is passed. Thank you, everyone. Unless there's any further discussion on that agenda item, we will be moving to the Grant Subcommittee update. Finance Director Kang, would you like to kick us off, please? The battery budget must be expanded. Budget Officer Reimer. Yes, yeah. Yeah, top right. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Chair. So I'll be doing a brief overview over the discussions we've had with the Grant Subcommittee. So the Grant Subcommittee members that worked on a revamp of the process for the Social Service and Community Event Grant consisted of, sorry, could you go to the next 2 slides, please?
I just want to point out we are 5 minutes ahead of schedule according to the guide I got, so I don't want to hear any complaints about how long people are taking. We are ahead of schedule, folks. Still, keep it brief.
Okay, thank you. So the Grant Subcommittee members for this process included Chair Jake Schlack, Tim Cadman, and Councilor Wolf, and we met 2 times in September and December. The goal was to establish a transparent process over the eligibility guidelines, the requirements, and the funding caps, and then creating a scoring matrix to evaluate each applicant. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry. And just to as a recap of some of the eligibility changes, just to reiterate what was spoken at the last budget committee meeting. So we had set the eligibility requirements to for the social services grant to apply only to 501c3 organizations, government agencies, and those organizations that already have a fiscal sponsor. Another key item was the applicants must align with the funding priorities outlined in the guidelines and require grant reports after 6 months of the use of the funds. And then one of the additional changes that were modified from that last presentation was to increase the cap from 30,000 to 40,000 in response to some of the inflationary comments that were raised at the last discussion. And then that the funding priorities will be set annually with the City Council priorities in mind. Next slide, please. So on the community event grants, similar to the social services grant, there hasn't been any changes to any of the eligibility requirements from the last proposal. It would still include 501c3 organizations, C4, C6s, and other governmental agencies. And again, there's an exception if they have a fiscal sponsor. And some of the other items, just as a reminder, that were discussed last time is that the applicants must provide an event plan that is approved by the city before any check is issued, and that they will be required to report on their grant usage after 6 months of the use of the funds. And again, to be responsive to the inflationary concerns, the recommendation was to increase the cap to 50,000 from 40,000 in the prior year. And again, the last thing was that the City of Tigard must be recognized as a sponsor in all published materials for the event. Next slide, please. So as an update from the last meeting, we went through the development of a application rubric, or scoring rubric, sorry. And after various discussion, we landed on funding, a funding approach for the sub-grantees to be ranked on a 1 to 5 scale based on 5 different categories. Those 5 different categories are alignment, impact, equity, competency, and fiscal responsibility. And based on the scores, the total fund, and based on the scores and the total funding amounts available, that will determine and drive the award amount for each applicant. And the goal of this process is to ensure that the award amounts in the process are as transparent as possible for many of the competing needs in the community. And with that, we'll be publishing a guideline that was presented at the last budget committee, and that also includes a scoring matrix and a definition of each of these categories that are presented here to the public for each applicant to have as they're making their application. And we plan to start accepting applications the beginning of February and launching our communication campaign with our various communication channels. And with that, that concludes my update.
Thank you so much, Finance Director Kang. I'd like to, in particular, I know Tim Cadman's no longer a member of the Tigard Budget Committee, but he was very involved, especially with sort of the initial discussions that we had back in October. So I just want to publicly thank Tim for his contributions. And I really do, as one of the members who helped come up with the policy along with Councillor Wolf, I really do think this is the right next step for the subcommittee. It introduces structure, but is still pretty flexible and pretty responsive to the city's needs. The prior state was not having a real written policy, and more or less what would happen is you would show up, you'd sit down for 8 hours, and you'd start throwing out numbers sort of figure out where people felt numbers were appropriate, of course, based on certain factors. And this really just puts it down on paper and makes it a little more quantitative and more transparent and I think fair for the entire grant process. So I'm a big fan of these proposals. Councillor Wolf, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, Chair, I think you did a great job of summarizing our conversations, and I appreciate the shout out to Tim because he really was very thoughtful in this process. Eric, thank you. And Kalina as well, of bringing all this together. So just thank you all, and no further comments.
Thank you. Before I ask for other questions or comments, there was one discussion that we were having after these documents were prepared, but before this presentation, that I wanted to sort of broach with the committee, or at least put out there to see if there's an appetite for it. Currently, we have a scoring matrix based on 5 different categories, and Councilor Wolf and I were thinking, well, should we have some sort of scoring impact for performance impact? Because during that 8-hour day, it's not just us sitting down and reading a stack of applications. The people also come in for, as the earlier slide said, for 7 to 10 minutes to give a presentation about their organization and what the funds would go for and so on. And I think Councilor Wolf originated the idea, and perhaps can explain it, what led to your proposal of this.
So thank you, Chair. So I think what my intent was is that as committee members, we come into the day having reviewed and read and assessed the grants. So we walk in doing those initial scorings, and so, but really wanting to give space for what did we learn, and as Jake said, the impact from the presentation. But I didn't want to have the day trying to go back and figure out how you kind of reflect on what you've already assessed. So to have that kind of added impact from presentation opportunity, we thought would be important and efficient for the day, to be honest. So.
Yeah, thank you, Councilor Wolf. As far as what this would practically look like, as opposed to having a scoring matrix that's scored 1 through 5, or I think 1 through 5, right? I know it ends at 5. I just want to confirm it goes down to 1. Rather than having an additional category to rate 1 through 5, it would be effectively 0 to 2 additional points added to the final score based on impact. So it would be only a boost, so to speak. You would not be penalized for a performance necessarily. You would just be getting extra sort of points in the process towards getting grant monies. That was the proposal or specific idea that we were thinking of in order to address this concern that subsequently arose. With that said, Mayor Lube.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that, because in my head I'm thinking of just kind of the way that I score things, and I like, for lack of a better word, that squishy factor of having a conversation and being able to understand after looking at those documents the impact, and so thank you for thinking about adding that extra piece of it.
Thank you, Mayor Lube. Do you have any other questions or comments at this time? All right, thank you. Clarissa Benfield, do you have any questions or comments?
No, all good from my side.
Thank you. Courtney Conejo.
Oh, I like the extra point scoring that you're adding on. I think that's impactful.
Thank you. Kelly Pement.
I don't have any questions right now.
Thank you. Leah Voigt.
Yeah, my question, I guess, is on the use of the rubric as relates to this recommendation, because in my head, I guess the scoring wouldn't happen until after the presentations, when someone had the opportunity. Like, you could come in with a preliminary score based on reviewing the applications, based on the information, and then when you had a chance to talk to someone, ask questions, get further clarification, that's then when the rubric scores would be assigned. And so in my mind, the then additional points would then be unnecessary. And so I guess my question was, if we get, maybe I should have started with, if we could get some clarification about how and when the rubric scores would be tallied and based off only the applications, or the applications plus the presentations, or when that would happen, because I think that would determine my opinion on this kind of additional piece.
Finance Director King, would you like to field that, please?
Yeah, if I could just speak, comment on the process. So on the application itself, we did ask specific questions, and so the applications have also been updated to specifically address the scoring guideline, or the scoring matrices. So on the application itself, on the merits of the application itself, it is possible to score, but as far as the process of considering scoring the matrices or the applicants before going into it would help the process of the 8-hour session to move it along a little bit faster and reduce some of the decision fatigue that comes with that day. But I am would like to hear further comments or questions on the process.
So yeah, I think that's a fair question, but I will be honest to say that it is a full day. I so appreciate the work of the committee to redesign, as Director King has talked about, so that our nonprofits applying have a clear understanding of what do we expect, what are the questions we're asking, and hey, guess what? We're going to have a rubric that mirrors what we've asked you to provide. So what I hope is in this process of preparing for March 15th, that we do have a strong sense. And so absolutely, is there an opportunity that there are some areas of question that you may have? I hope that coming in, that maybe you've flagged that. You know, in this particular area of the rubric, I had a question for this organization. But I also feel that having that added column for impact, it may be information that emphasizes or really brings something home that we felt made a difference, that they really, punched it and drove a home run to, advocate for their funding. But it is a full day, and you will see when you receive all the applications, it's a lot of preparation going into it as well. And so it is a sense of being respectful of the importance of the presentation and to be efficient with our time on the day because it is a full day. Thank you.
Yeah, and if I may add, as far as the scoring matrix goes, my impression throughout the entire discussions has been, it's not like we're going to review all the paper applications and then we send in our scoring matrix numbers and we can't change them. It's really meant to help quantify our impressions of the application, the written application. Much of the scoring matrix you can probably discern from the written application, but we want to make sure that we're considering as well the performance impact and sort of on the day how we feel about things. I say that to say that the matrix, first and foremost, the numbers aren't going to be decided before the presentation. I think that's very important to call out, but we can sort of sketch in or pencil in how we're feeling about it beforehand based on the information we have. And secondly, the matrix is not the end-all device for defining what the grants are going to be. It's meant to help get an idea of what appropriate numbers may be for the subcommittee to review and then ultimately propose as part of the budget. So it's meant to be more of a guiding element than a end-all be-all. This is how much money it will be based on these numbers that we put into a spreadsheet. It's meant to be a guiding element and a conversation starter.
Yes, I understand both those pieces. One of my So where I feel conflicted about this kind of additional piece is I support the idea of coming in kind of with some draft numbers. I've served on this before, so yeah, I know that there's a lot of work, right? I worked for nonprofits, and so I've filled out grant applications before. It's a lot of work, and so I guess I support the idea of kind of coming in with draft numbers, and then after presentations, finalizing them and submitting them. The part that I'm conflicted about is that in some ways having a matrix, right? I fully support, I think, in the transparency piece of it, is incredibly important for the organizations, for community members, that this is what we're basing it off of. love that. And in terms of what Mayor Loop said, that the flexibility of, you know, sometimes there is something that isn't as quantifiable, but was impactful or is meaningful in some ways, and having room to incorporate that and include that in those determinations. I support that. The piece that I'm concerned about, or is that, especially if we're thinking about an equity lens, that historically there are differences in how individuals and people from different groups are received and perceived by others. And I know that's a very vague statement, and I know that also, right, would be reflected in just the base 1 through 5 scoring, that any biases, unconscious biases, would show up there as well. So just having just that without the bonus doesn't necessarily solve that problem, but that is a concern that I have, that while the flexibility, I think, really serves a really valuable role, and in some ways can make things more equitable or more accessible for grantees to be funded, because, you know, things don't always fit into data and numbers. I think in some ways it can remove a lot of barriers and help connect people to resources and grant money. And it can also, it just has the potential to, I think, exacerbate, you know, that person seemed really friendly, or that person gave a really heartfelt impression or presentation, which, not that any of us would do that intentionally. And right, we know from studies over and over again that you can have the exact 2 same resumes, and based on one person's, the name being changed or the gender in a story that are otherwise identical being changed, we see different results in terms of how they are rated afterwards. And so that is just, I think, something I just want to keep in mind and bring to the conversation as we have these discussions, that personability or making a high impact presentation, it can both be the thing that opens the door, which makes it really wonderful, and it can be something that can have unintended consequences. And again, maybe those unintended consequences happen anyway, but yeah, that's the part I want to bring. And maybe that includes, maybe it's not reflected in the scoring guide, but we do a kind of fund review after, over time, and see, you know, are there commonalities or differences amongst organizations that are being funded? Do they meet the values that we discussed, or are we noticing patterns that are not what we want? And I know our community members change every year, and so hopefully those patterns aren't happening, but just kind of that audit piece. You know, there's a program that was being reviewed, and that I'm aware of, separate from the city and separate from my organization where I work, where they found that, you know, certain applications for this program were being approved at different rates based on different factors. And so just, I guess, wanting to incorporate a review of that, perhaps, just as part of that equity work that we continue to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah. I appreciate you raising those concerns. And what I have to say is, I think, you know, we're launching a new policy here. This is new ideas that we're trying to put into action. And I think, you know, those are very good concerns to bring up and be aware of, especially with you being on the subcommittee this year, to see if things are working the way you would expect them to, or if there are concerns with the process as it's actually being implemented on the day. So that way we can address those and get that feedback and iterate on this policy going forward. As far as the idea of sort of a long-term review of monies that are allocated over time, I think that's a very prudent report that could be easily spun up and something that we can consider going forward. Thank you. Council President Hu, do you have any questions or comments?
Yeah, so I seem to remember an organization missed the deadline last round and we made an exception. Has there been any policy changes regarding organization missing deadline, or are we still going forward with this somewhat flexible approach?
I don't recall us having any particular discussions around that. I mean, my viewpoint, the reason why I think this ultimately the consideration and sort of flexibility around that grant application, for me, I felt okay with it, was because these grant amounts that the subcommittee decides on are part of the proposed budget. And of course, the full budget committee has review over that. So if there were concerns about grant allocations and maybe a missed deadline or something, the full budget committee ultimately has the power of review and amendment of the proposed budget. I don't know if that answers your question or addresses it, but that's sort of what my thought process is based on what you said.
I guess my concerns, maybe it's the same as layers, or maybe on different side, flip side layers. We want to have transparency, right? We don't want to give the appearance that somebody who has connection get a second chance. So we want to be as objective, as neutral as possible.
Yes, and in that particular case, if I remember correctly, and Councilor Wolf, feel free to check my memory on this because I remember it was your proposal originally, we opened the grant process up for every applicant at that time. We did only receive one application during that time, but it was opened for any new applicants to be considered. Additionally, sorry, I lost my train of thought. It's 9:18 at night. But it was open to everyone, and it was advertised appropriately. That's where I was going. I think Assistant City Manager Nyland may have been involved with that back then, maybe. I remember you commenting on it at the time. You were. I just not trying.
Sorry, this is Leah Voigt. May I make a comment?
Yes, Leah, you can make a comment. I'd like to hear from Assistant City Manager Nyland.
I do recall that we weren't pointing out and identifying one specific agency or a missed. We opened it up and advertised it and promoted it, letting people know that there was an opportunity, and it's one person responded or one organization responded.
Yes, thank you. Leah, your question or comment, please.
Yeah, it was sharing that information and the fact that that proposal of whether or not we were open to doing that, it was brought to the entire budget committee, and we agreed that we were willing to do that. In years past, you know, I've experienced when an organization missed the deadline, and at that time they brought their proposal to the budget committee meetings, asking, you know, to be included in the proposed budget. And so it's been handled different ways, but I believe it was, yeah, each time it was brought to the larger budget committee for how it would be handled.
Council President Hu?
Well, if we're going to do that in the future, maybe we should have a criteria on when we will consider opening up again, so it's consistent. But
sure, I think that's a valid point to raise if this has happened multiple times. Last year was my first time where that situation arose. I'm glad, Leah, you shared your experience where sort of similar things may have happened previously. So it's definitely something we can consider. And again, we're launching a new policy here, so feedback is very valuable. We want to make sure we're doing the right thing, not just doing something to do something. So I do appreciate that feedback. Mayor Loop?
Yeah, if I could just respond to it. I think I appreciate wanting the clarity and sort of a black and white scenario, but I think one of the things is I think it's important for us to put guardrails in general for future policy, but not to restrict future councils and budget committees so much that if all of a sudden a policy said this, you know, it was a black and white, well, we can't look at that because the policy says no. I want to provide enough flexibility that if a circumstance may arise, a budget committee in the future could have that discussion, because to my knowledge, that's the first time we've ever done that and sort of felt like there was extenuating circumstances where we opened it back up to everybody. So I don't feel like that person necessarily got special treatment, or that group got special treatment, even if they were the only ones who apply. I don't want it to be so black and white that if something horrible, you know, happens to one of our longtime, you know, recipients, we say, no, we can't look at that again. And all of a sudden, you know, God forbid, the balloon festival doesn't get any money, like for whatever reason, you know what I mean? Like it would feel inconsistent with, you know, the city that we're trying to be. So I appreciate wanting the clarity, but I also want to balance it with enough flexibility that future budget committees can have that conversation and decide.
Thank you, Mayor Loop. Council President Hu, do you have any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I agree with that. So maybe we can write that in our policy.
Sure.
Said, you know, you can apply after deadline.
I
know. That's all.
I appreciate the direction. I think it is definitely an action item that the subcommittee will consider going forward, and we will put it on the agenda.
Yeah, just a suggestion. I'm not insisting on it. I just want to, you know, follow up on Leia's comment that, you know, we don't want to give the impression that we're giving any group special treatment. So
absolutely, I agree, and I appreciate that perspective. So yeah, we'll definitely consider how to address that. The subcommittee will go away like last time in October. We presented our ideas and we got feedback, and we made iterations such as around increasing the caps on certain grant amounts. And I think, you know, it's an iterative process. We want to make sure we have the right policy here and we're addressing the budget committee's concerns. With that said, Councillor Singh, do you have any questions or comments?
No questions or comments.
Thank you. Councillor Vogel, do you have any questions or comments?
Not any at this time, but thank you guys so much.
Thank you. Are there any further questions or comments from any budget committee member? Hearing none, I want to thank everyone for their feedback, and the subcommittee will definitely keep these, you know, positive and negative comments, not negative, but concerns and, you know, in mind over this first year where we're trying to introduce this policy. And we will definitely see how everything goes. Thank you. The final budget committee item, I expected a slow cheer from everyone, is the fiscal year 2025 budget calendar. Budget Manager Plath, will you please provide an overview of the calendar?
Thank you, and I'm excited that you're so excited to hear from me now. So this will be probably one of the shortest ones. So we have the important dates, and I've also kind of given you guys a handout, you want to put it on your refrigerator, of some of these important dates. And as you can see, the first one is you all here tonight. So I appreciate all of you being here at this hour, either in person or virtually. Thank you very much for giving your time to come to the Budget Committee and just to help your community. So I wanted to give that thank you. The next one we can kind of mark off proposed on there, because it sounds like all of the subcommittee members have agreed that March 15th is a good date for the grant subcommittee. So we'll be getting that out very shortly with that information. The next two dates that we have on here in April, the 10th, that is going to be an optional budget committee training. So any of you that are new to the committee or have questions on budget. We've even been taking notes tonight on some of the questions and comments and things that we can add into the committee training so that we give you the best information before we come together to actually discuss the fiscal year 25 budget. So you have some kind of tools in your pocket. So we'll be doing that on April 10th. On April 19th, we plan to distribute to you the proposed budget document so that you have that available. We will come together on April 27th, so very important date, and that's when you'll receive the budget message from City Manager Reimer and get the first initial budget discussions. We'll continue on May 14th. And just of note, May 14th, on that printed one, it tells you that is going to be a Tuesday night, not a Monday night. And then May 20th, we'll come back. Hopefully at that time, we will receive approval of the budget so that we can move forward to June 18th, when we'll come back to the City Council and ask for their consideration of budget adoption.
Thank you. The only thing I'd like to add to clarify, especially for our new member, is that the April 27th budget meeting is a Saturday, and that usually is scheduled for a full day because we do go through quite a bit. The budget message, huge slide deck that I recommend printing out if you can to follow everything, and that's very important to note. Whereas the other two budget meetings would be sort of like, an evening during the work week. Mayor Lube.
If I could just ask a favor since these are already set, if you could put out calendar invites, and so it's on all of our calendars to hold it, that sort of rules where I go and look for things, so that would be greatly appreciated.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments about the calendar other than calendar invites? Hearing nothing, I will, there not being any additional agenda items for the Budget Committee, I will be handing the meeting back over to Mayor Lube. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We have no non-agenda items this evening and no executive session. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
I second.
All those who are in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you so much. Good night, Tigard.